Order, order. Stella Creasy to move the motion.
Good afternoon, Mrs McVeigh. It's a pleasure to serve under your chair today on such an important issue. Let me start with something I believe is a truism in British politics. We can learn a lot from Disney and the films of our childhood. And in this debate and in this discussion today, I believe in particular the words of Elsa from Frozen are apposite. It is time to let it go to those people who are still obsessed with the debates of 2016 and 2019. And I suspect actually across this House many of us would agree with that, because if we think about how long ago it was and time has moved on, it is indeed a long time ago. It was 2016 when President Trump was first elected the first time. It was the year that sadly David Bowie passed away. Really is that long ago. Russia was involved in a war in the Donbass, but no further. TikTok did not even exist. That wasn't until 2019, which is also now a very long time ago, which is when we actually finally did decide to leave the European Union in the deal that was struck with the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, and was also the year, of course, of Frozen 2 and that famous song, Into the Unknown. 2019 was also the year that Greg gave us a vegan sausage roll. Notre Dame burst down and Boris Johnson indeed was elected Prime Minister. Game of Thrones finally finished on TV, not the Conservative leadership challenges, the actual television series. My point is that so much has happened in our history since the tired old debates were first rehearsed. Let us not do that today, because we have left the European Union. I stand here as chair of the Labour Movement for Europe, not seeking to prosecute an argument to rejoin, but to look at the deal that was struck on Monday and the summit. Frankly, because I do not believe this country has time to engage in the discussion around rejoin. We need a salvage operation, and I see the deal on Monday as the start of that salvage operation of a future following the impact of Brexit. I also hope that we can, even if we disagree on that salvage operation, convince the Minister that there needs to be more scrutiny around our relationship with Europe, that we might disagree about the direction of travel, but we are bound together by a recognition that taking back control means that this police needs to have discussions about what the deals are, what the opportunities are, what it means for our constituents. That perhaps, like Banquo's ghost, the former member for Stone, still lives with us, when actually all of us can show today that were we to have European scrutiny formats in this House, it would be a positive and constructive contribution to the deal-making process. So that, I believe, is what is on offer today, the opportunity to take us forward, not back. Because we can see the impact now of the Brexit, of the deal that was done, and the impact it's had on our constituents, and our constituents need us to ask questions about what will happen next. The 1.8 million jobs that we are missing as a result of the deal that was struck, the stagnation in the growth of exports, the 16,000 businesses who gave up trading as a direct result of the benefit of Brexit, which was paperwork. The EU is our biggest trading partner. It accounts for 41% of our exports and 51% of our imports. By comparison, the US is just 22% of our exports and 13% rather, of our imports. Clearly, this is a fundamental relationship to the future of British business and British jobs. The summit on Monday was an opportunity not just to look at the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, looking at it being something written into the very details of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement 5 years on from its commissioning, but it's also to do something that the public want. Because the public tell us, by two-thirds of them, that Brexit has been detrimental to the cost of living. 65% say it's had a negative impact on our economy, and 64% bad for British business. 60% of our constituents think that a closer relationship with Europe is in our interests. Because they, unlike us, I'll perhaps give way.
I represent one of the constituencies that voted 87% to remain, and I represent 22,000 EU nationals who are part of the fabric of our community. But today I want to ask her a question about young people, who I think she probably will mention at some point in her speech. The statistics show that there's been a 30% drop in the number of school children going to Europe on school trips, and that disadvantaged areas have been hit hardest.
That intervention is An intervention and not a small speech, because others have put in for a speech. So can we get to the question, please?
The UK is not on the list of travellers scheme, which is why it's so hard for school children to go. Does my honourable friend agree that we should better access, I'm making it very short, better access to Europe than what we also had when we were growing up?
As somebody who still remembers the powerful trip that my school took us on to Ypres to look at the First World War, the fact that there's been a dramatic decline in school trips to Europe harms our children's education and is absolutely something I'm sure the Minister will want to refer to. But the public are now living in the world where we are now. That is why they want us to look at the deal. They recognise that Europe now has the highest employment rate since 2005, where we've had a second-term Trump administration that has brought tariffs and turmoil just 121 days into that administration, that Putin has now invaded Ukraine itself, that there is a horrific conflict in the Middle East, and that China and Iran now figure in our national security concerns too, and that, as ever, technology overruns us all. There are now 159 million TikTok users in Europe, and it is predicted within 3 years 15% of our day-to-day decisions will be made by AI. All of us will probably ultimately become redundant. I shall leave it to members here opposite to decide whether that is a good or a bad thing. Everybody else has moved on. It is time that we did too in this House. In that spirit, therefore, let me fail to heal my own words and turn back to perhaps one of the most damaging aspects of the debate around Brexit, because I welcome the Minister's hard work and the deal that has been struck as a testament to the ambitions of the previous Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, and the concept of cakeism. It is truly incredible to see that, far from it being impossible to be pro-cake and pro-eating it, this bespoke deal delivers for the UK in many ways that many people have suggested was not possible. So let me start by putting on record my support for the following: the formal security and defence partnership with the promise of exploring participation in a new defence fund, whilst retaining our red line about not participating in the single market. I will, of course, Madam Chair, take an intervention from any Conservative member who wishes to apologise for the deliberate refusal of the previous government to put anything about foreign policy or defence cooperation into the previous deal, a decision that has left us uniquely exposed. I see that nobody wishes. I will happily take his intervention.
The government says NATO is the cornerstone of our defence, and that's how we cooperate with the EU, with our European partners on defence. And the EU is an add-on which has been in the minds and the ether of the EU since the Maastricht Treaty, but has never come to anything substantial.
And I'm sure that the honourable gentleman will want to tell that to his constituents when we see that, of course, NATO is vital, but we are dealing with a new world. They see the aggression of President Putin. They see the need to stand up to address the situation in Gaza, and they see the leadership that is being shown by our European colleagues and wish us to be part of not playground generals, but grown-ups. And that is exactly what this defence deal will be. I also welcome proposals for cooperating on foreign aid, because that is crucial not only to tackling the poverty that we see around the world, but also preventing conflict. Conflict which is driving many to flee persecution, proving how aid is often our best defence against the small boats rather than the bluster of some of those opposite. A resolution of the risk that would be a death knell to the British steel industry of divergency in our carbon emissions trading schemes, something that Energy UK admits will mean around £800 million per year of payments going to our Treasury rather than the EU. It is worth remembering that 75% of our steel exports go to the European Union. It's worth £3 billion. Frankly, if you want to save British steel, you need to save their market, and that is what this resolution will do. And talks get us to be able to use e-gates at the borders, because queuing might be a national pastime, but it's not a national sport any of us enjoy. Cooperation with Europol and data sharing on fingerprints, DNA and criminal records. Again, I suspect in future years many of us will realise how criminal it was that this was not part of the original deal, and so it made it easier for those people who wish to do harm to our constituents to evade justice by crossing the border. I'm sure the honourable gentleman again is going to get up and apologise to the British public for such an oversight.
The general rule in politics is never to apologise, never to explain. Someone once said, and I'm certainly not going to. I'm not going to break that rule now. But the truth is, of course, the honourable lady is arguing for cooperation, and we all affirm that. Britain has cooperated with its neighbours and countries more widely over the whole of our history. We began cooperating with Portugal under Edward III, as no doubt the Minister will confirm and speak about in some detail. So it's not about cooperation, it's about governance. And there's a fundamental difference between collaboration and cooperation and government from abroad.
I'm always pleased to see the honourable gentleman opposite admit that he is in fact a rule taker, not a rule maker. But it is noticeable that the cooperation that his government did not pursue meant that we did not have access to the EU databases such as Eurodac and the Schengen Information Service. Now, those are critical to stopping cross-border crime and indeed addressing illegal migration. So the honourable gentleman talks about the fact we've always cooperated. It was a conscious decision by the previous government not to do so. It is a conscious decision by this government to address that, to help make us safer. They rejected time and time again important security measures just because they had the word Europe in the title. This government will not make that mistake. And that's before we even get on to the basics that I believe most of our constituents will be interested in, which is the SPS deal that will see the vast majority of paperwork and checks that were killing British food manufacturing and farmers, as well as causing inflation to costs here. Just the removal of export health certificates will be saving businesses up to £200 per consignment, a cost that was being passed on to our constituents. Again, I will offer any of those who want to defend the previous deal the opportunity to apologise to all those who work in logistics and who've had to deal with Sevington and the queues and the delays and the confusion about getting goods across the border. And I do hope that the Minister will also be able to confirm to us that along with removal of the export health certificates, we are looking again at how we can remove the border operating model that the last government brought in, which put further charges on top of the export health rules and, of course, meant more delays in getting seeds to British farmers, getting flowers to market for our British businesses. All of our constituents will welcome an SPS deal because it's a way to tackle the £6.5 billion we've had to spend extra on food and drink as a result of these charges, on top of other costs because of Brexit. And yes, of course, we must talk about the fish, because Britain's fishing industry has indeed been battered by Brexit. Boris Johnson promised both prodigious amounts of fish to be caught and EU vessels out of our waters, and he delivered neither. Fish cakes, indeed. This deal will start to address the damage done to our fishing industries. It's an honest and fair deal to secure no further loss of access and a restoration of a market for fish. The SPS deal will cut the Brexit red tape that has caused a 29% drop in fish exports to the EU since 2019. I'm sure members opposite and members on these benches read today the words of Ian Perks, a fish merchant from Brixham, who said that he had a catch worth £80,000 written off because of a dispute over the temperature it had been stored at, and another consignment rejected because the Latin name for Dover sole was spelt wrong. The deal done by the previous government expired next year. If you want the investment the industry desperately needs, then the stability of terms matters. And with 80% of our catch exported, 70% of that to the EU, this offers a chance for that stable future for our fishing communities. It's the same with energy. The deal done by the previous government expired next year. But as the Prime Minister pointed out, we have been aligning in any case, in practice, since we left the EU. We just haven't had any say in what happens. We've aligned because the standards that are high, and because we're asking businesses to follow two different sets of rules is a recipe for more regulation, not less. Anybody who doubts that needs to look at the record of the last government. And I stand here a red against red tape, welcoming the ruthlessness with which the government has acted. Because the previous government tried to introduce the UK Charter Mark, something it then admitted would cost British business billions of pounds to implement. And then it promptly stated that if businesses had met EU standards, they'd met British ones too. What a mess. The product regulation bill is going through Parliament right now. I'm sure that the Minister will want to update us about what this deal will mean for that bill and its terms of trade. Members opposite will decry the idea that we are rule takers. We were under them, but under this deal we will be consulted. Now, we will have to abide by a dispute resolution system. Members opposite act as if this is some new phenomenon, something we've never had as part of any other trade deal, or indeed as part of their trade deal with the European Union. Thankfully, we can look to a non-mythical creature, but one that is certainly at risk, the puffin, to see what the reality of this might be. Because last year, the EU took the UK and Holyrood to court for banning sand eel fishing in the North Sea and Scottish waters, because it wanted to protect this vital food source for the puffin. A noble aim I think all of us can get behind. The process, the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague, had to decide whether the ban was a reasonable measure and, as a result, rule on our ability to determine fishing in our own seas. Those courts are members of what they've upheld that decision to protect puffins and have done so on the basis of the European Court of Justice, a process the previous government had signed up to already and is part of the future negotiating deal. So members opposite talk of sovereignty as if it's some lump of plasticine that we can hand out, but the truth is that this deal upholds our ability to make our case and to work with our neighbours within a reasonable framework. It's 5 years on since we left, and we're still talking about and affected by the decisions that Europe makes. We're just not in the room where they're being made. I'll happily give way.
Lady, for giving way. One of the things that's still not yet agreed is getting back into the Erasmus scheme, and the Turing scheme that was proposed instead, of course, cut out youth groups, which has a big effect in my constituency and around the country. Does she hope, and perhaps the Minister's listening, can perhaps give us does she have any further information about the pace at which we might get back into the Erasmus scheme?
Well, I absolutely agree with her. That is a very fair and central question, because one of the things I wanted to come to is it's right that we make sure our young people don't bear the brunt of this obsession with isolation at the expense of influence. That is why it is right to negotiate a youth mobility scheme and to look at Erasmus. What I urge the government to do, though, is to ensure it is one that can prioritise apprenticeships and training opportunities so that future generations can benefit in the way many previously have about taking a job in Spain and Germany, as well as those who want to study. Because ultimately this is just the start. It's the start of the process, and indeed I'm very aware that Frozen 3 is due to come to cinemas anytime soon. Literally, as we know, there will be much more detail to work out, and I'm sure the Minister will give us a timeline for when decisions may or may not be made and when we will get some of those details. I was about to conclude.
I just want to correct on a matter of fact.
Oh, Frozen 3 has definitely come to cinema.
The dispute about sand eel fishing was a dispute resolved under the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, which is a bilateral arbitration panel. It had nothing to do with the European Court of Justice. It's a normal trading agreement. No involvement of the CJEU was involved.
I can only urge the member to go and look at the basis for the decision-making arbitration panel. I can hear the Minister is champing at the bit to correct him as well. Misled is a very serious term, and I hope the member will withdraw.
Would she like to correct the record? Because actually what she said was incorrect, and we can prove it afterwards, and she will have to correct the record afterwards if that is the case.
I point to the point about the protection of The Hague and where The Hague takes its judgments from. That is ultimately where the decisions were made in the Court of Arbitration. It relies on those rulings. That it is part of the process, and I suspect the fact that the member has decried that speaks to the need for us all to have more time to scrutinise and do justice to this issue, because I suspect when the member gets up, he will continue to make this argument that we don't want to work with the European Court of Justice. The truth is his government had brought in mechanisms that use the European Court of Justice at its part of its framework. And this agreement, and as the Minister says, it's the Windsor framework does as well, it shows where and how it works. And I think our constituents deserve the honesty of how the processes actually work and what the rulings are, rather than the fantasy. The puffins are very real, the puffery is not. Let me go finally to some questions I wish to ask the Minister to address in his summing up, because there are questions that come out of the summit and the deal that's been struck. He will be aware, obviously, that many of us have been championing membership of the Pan-Euro-Mediterranean Convention, because that's also about the rules of origin paperwork, which have been so harmful to our supply chains. I wonder if he could give us an update on whether or not there is an opportunity for us to be part of that mechanism again and help British businesses with all that paperwork. I also recognise that we need to understand about whether there's been any progress made on the mutual recognition of conformity assessments and qualifications. We know the latter is in, but the agreement matters for both. And finally, can he say a bit more about what will happen to our financial services, which have not been mentioned as yet, but are the primary driver of growth in our economy? Madam Chair, this deal will see our constituents finally see the fog of Brexit, the excessive paperwork, the partnerships that have been damaged and the personal opportunities lost. I welcome the Prime Minister's commitment to use these summits to keep working on our relationship with our neighbours. An honest recognition that we can fight many things in life, but geography really isn't one of them. Because our constituents have paid the price for a bad deal. Indeed, many of us have paid a price. In case of some members opposite, I think literally having bankrolled the Brexit campaign. But no wonder the member for Clacton isn't with us today. I wouldn't want to have to be here to admit what a botched deal has been done. I'll happily give way.
The lady has helpfully laid out a list of issues for the Minister. One I would add, and she may have a comment on, is what we do about touring musicians. It's had a really big impact that people are unable to tour in Europe because of the cost of cabotage and visas and so on, and just the time delays. Does she not agree that that's something we should be pushing for as well?
Well, I do indeed, and I was going to say, I hope today in what the Minister says, although we may be making Elton John unhappy in the main chamber, we could make Elton John very happy with the progress in this chamber about touring musicians. But we also welcome the chance to work across the House to fix it, to offer proper scrutiny, to offer debate and discussion. The world is a very uncertain place right now, and our constituents will look to this deal as offering hope to their future. Because as much as there is chaos and confusion, we can be crystal clear that both cake and change is possible. Thank you.
They want to be called in the debate, and also that we'll be going to the front bench just before 4 o'clock to allow Stella Creasy time to do a wind-up. Richard Tice. Oh, sorry, the question is that the House has considered the EU-UK summit. Richard Tice.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Well, this will go down as a week in parliamentary history as the week of the greatest surrender, bookended by today. Our valuable freehold is being surrendered. The Chagos Islands, where there'll be a statement later, and the beginning of the week, our valuable freedoms won from the European Union through the joys of Brexit is being surrendered. And I think many members of the British public will be confused because last week the government was talking about the joys of the freedoms of Brexit to be able to do trade deals with India, trade deals with the United States. And all of a sudden this week, it has gone back to the fog of surrender by handcuffing ourselves very close to the European Union. Now, there's a rule in business which has been deployed many times by parliamentarians that nothing is agreed till everything is agreed. And normally with the EU, there's always a last-minute drama. But this time was different because what happened was little was agreed and everything was conceded.
Yeah, that's it.
That's the bottom line, Madam Chair. Little has actually been agreed and everything has been conceded in an extraordinary act of surrender where basically it's that, to use another expression, it's the thin end of the wedge. And the EU can't believe their luck in that they've opened the door, they've stuck the little wedge in there, and they've now got lots of things that they are still negotiating on. And every time they're going to say, well, you've got to agree this before we move on to the next one. We've heard it all before, and yet this government has learnt nothing. So we know that the first surrender is very dear to my own constituents in Boston, my fishermen, who are absolutely raging furious because they assumed that after the end of this first phase deal, then more quotas would be negotiated back to the UK, they would be beneficiaries, and that we would be taking back more control of our waters. Instead, it's all been conceded for 12 years. It's gone. I'm most grateful to the Honourable Lady for intervening.
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for giving way. Aren't his fishermen pleased that the market that they were trying to export fish to, which was often turning that fish back because of the massively complicated controls, they have now got open to them again? We were not eating that fish in the UK and it was rotting too often.
I'm most grateful to the Honourable Lady, to which I say no. They haven't mentioned that at all, and nor have any of the major logistics firms in my constituency mentioned once about the delays, the so-called delays at the border. This surrender of fishing is completely and utterly inexcusable, and nothing has been gained in return. And then, of course, the second big surrender is that apparently we've negotiated theoretical access to some future EU defence fund, but we don't know how much access. All we know is that we're going to have to pay a whole load of cash, but we don't know how much cash. It's all got to be negotiated in the future. So it's little's been agreed and everything has been conceded. The Honourable Lady is most busy.
On the defence industry, we have some of the best defence industries in the world in the UK. I am disappointed that, I think we're fellow patriots of this country, that he wants to downplay our ability to actually access this money and to support UK businesses and jobs.
What I said was, if you're going to agree a deal, agree the terms of the deal. Don't just say that you're going to... You'd like to have a bit of the action, and please tell me how much it's going to cost me later, and I've no idea how much of the action I will get. That's a terrible deal. And we all know that no deal, Madam Chair, is better than a bad deal. But don't worry, let's move on to Surrender 3, shall we? Surrender 3 is, of course, the issue of becoming a rule taker. So the Honourable Member for Walthamstow referred to the agri-foods, the SPS deal, and that all sounds very good until you realise that actually, well, so now we've got to take a whole load of extra rules that we have no input in whatsoever from Brussels under a process called dynamic alignment that quite possibly would mean we couldn't do any further trade deal with a great nation like the United States, instead of arguing for mutual recognition, which of course can exist between nations who have excellent standards of food and products, which we have, of course. So 3 great surrenders, and it seems to me that we have gained nothing there. Indeed, we'll probably have to pay more if we want any more rules to be given to us. Why would we do that? Why would we pay more when we've given ourselves the freedom to not have to pay any more? We thought we'd done all of that. But then again, if we're not content with that, what about Surrender 4? This is the big one. And I think the Minister himself earlier this year said, don't worry, chaps. No plans for any form of youth mobility scheme. Well, it turned out the Minister was right, because some clever person rebadged it. I've got an idea. Let's call it a youth experience scheme. Well, I'm sure it's a lovely experience. But when you're 30 years old, are you still a youth? Or is it a middle-aged experience scheme? And during the negotiation, I could see what will happen, because this hasn't been concluded. This will become an old age experience scheme. And then what will happen is that someone will say, but hang on, if it's an old age experience scheme, we haven't got the workers in the care homes to look after the old age people from the EU who've come over to our glorious care homes. So then we'll have to have more freedom of movement and dependence, because this is still open-ended. We don't know the age of the youth experience scheme. We don't know the duration of the youth experience scheme. We have no idea about the number of youth experience. I'm hoping I will still qualify for this scheme at the age of 60. Of course I will give way to the...
I, like him, share a burning desire to still be considered young and, alas, have to face the brutal reality. But I just wonder if he has such similar concerns about the 13 other youth mobility schemes that we have with countries around the world. Does he fear the Australians, the New Zealanders, the Canadians, the Japanese, the Uruguayans who come on a youth mobility scheme in the same way that he does Europeans? Or is it that he thinks they're younger and fitter than him?
Well, they may well be younger and fitter than my good self, and I'm most grateful. But the truth is, actually, proximity is a big difference. But the concerns of my constituents in Boston, which has received a very significant quantity of net immigration from East European, they haven't seen any Australians in Boston and the likes. And I think there is a proximity issue there. But surely it must be right. If you're going to agree a deal, then agree the terms of the deal. But we don't know the numbers, we don't know the cap, we know absolutely nothing. We don't really know the duration of this. And so we're completely and utterly at the mercy of the European Union. And I have to say, to anybody in this place, spend a day with me in sunny Skegness. Knock on 1,000 doors with me, and I promise you, not a single door. The first thing they will say to you is, I want a youth experience scheme for Johnny or Judy. Not a single one of them will say that. Of course, I'll be delighted to give way to my honourable friend.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and I thank the Chair for announcing me. With anything, the terms of when the terms are unclear, of course, the big risk is the unintended consequences. With over 60 million people in the EU under 30, would my honourable friend agree with me that the unintended consequences here, given that this scheme does nothing for the immigration issues we're already facing, could be quite severe?
Well, this is the point of the honourable member is bang on, because under 30, you've got some tens of millions. Is it 60 million? Is it 70 million? Who knows? But it is a sizable number. And we know that we have huge pressure on our housing. We have a determination to increase wages for British citizens. We've got pressure on our healthcare. So actually, the British people have clearly expressed just a couple of weeks ago in some elections when they backed Reform UK's net immigration policy of net zero. They said, actually, we quite like that, which is why, of course, we did so well. So I think that there may be a sort of a loss of the ability to listen to the concerns of the British people. I'd be most delighted to give way to my neighbouring MP.
Well, indeed, and I can confirm I've never been an Australian or a Canadian in Boston or in Spalding, actually. But leaving that to one side, isn't the real challenge of this, the real threat of this, even more sinister than the honourable gentleman suggests? Because we have, stubbornly, a huge number of young people not in education, employment, training. In fact, the trend is slightly up. It is a tragedy that those people are trapped without either jobs or learning to get jobs. They will inevitably be competing with people from abroad for those early opportunities to work, young people who we need to back. And I do fear that unless we get absolute clarity on the length of time and the character of the scheme, it will threaten those young people's chances.
Absolutely right. And in my constituency, those young people, they want better jobs, better paid jobs. They don't want our wages being suppressed.
Well, never give way.
Of course I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
He's talked a lot about European young people wanting to come to the UK. What about the many British young people that would like to go to Europe, to Berlin, to Paris, to Milan? Those people from Boston and Skegness that would like to study overseas. What does he say to those people?
Well, as I was just mentioning earlier, he'd be most welcome. Come and knock on 1,000 doors with me in Boston or Skegness, and I promise you, I don't think any of them will be rushing out. That's not their primary aim. Their primary aim is to get a good job here in this constituency, because they're very proud of their constituency. So I've talked about 4 surrenders. I'm going to move on to surrender 5. Delighted to give way to the honourable lady.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I have spent quite a lot of time in Spalding and Skegness, but that's not what I wanted to ask about. I'd be very happy to knock on thousands of doors there. But is the honourable member absolutely certain that there is nobody in his constituency that would like to take up the opportunity of having an experience in the European Union?
Well, the honourable lady infers that we're unable to go to the EU. Of course you can travel to the EU, but what I'm referring to is the fact that what people want is in their neighbourhood, near home, they want the ability to get a good job with good pay prospects. And at the moment, that is the reality that we are not getting. That's what people focus on. I'm besieged by requests. The honourable lady, come.
The honourable lady who wants to go back to Skegness Seaside at some point to remember her childhood. So you haven't. Sorry. The honourable member hasn't answered my question about certainty that there is nobody in their constituency that could possibly benefit from a youth experience scheme that could give them and actually enhance their employment opportunities when they come back to the UK.
Thank you. Well, look, the honest truth is, yes, there might be some, but I tell you what, the honourable lady. But the truth is, what they don't want is 10 or 20 or 50 times more coming into Boston or Skegness and taking their jobs and suppressing their wages. That is the reality of my constituents, Madam Chair. But I must move on to the surrender 5, which is, of course, the much vaunted... Surrender 4 or surrender 5? I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
A moment ago, the honourable gentleman said that he's yet to see a Japanese or a Uruguayan or an Australian in Boston and Skegness. What makes him think that European young people would be more likely to hitch up there?
the basis of experience and history over the last 19 years, since 2004 and the transition 8, I think it was, when Boston and Skegness has seen a huge inflow of tens of thousands and thousands of East Europeans. So look, the reality is, as we move on to surrender point 5, this is with regard to the emissions trading scheme, which is, as we speak, driving up the price of the carbon tariffs towards the EU's carbon tariff. And why do we want these tariffs? Oh, I know. It's because of net stupid zero. I'm delighted to give way to the Honourable Lady.
Can I just ask him to clarify? Did he say tens of thousands of Europeans were coming in? Is that an accurate figure?
Yes, I did use that figure within my constituency of probably over 10,000. It's a very sizable number. It's probably one of the greatest recipients in any constituency of the UK. So I will stand by that number. And I move on to surrender point 5, which is the EU transmission trading scheme, which that is going to actually, it's just going to drive up prices. Whereas, of course, if you don't subscribe to net zero, then actually you don't need any of these carbon tariffs, and that drives down prices. And what is going to happen by linking ourselves, handcuffing ourselves to this EU carbon trading scheme is that the bureaucrats in Brussels, they are going to say, well, in all these other areas to do with trading, we're going to have to comply with this and that and the other. This is the thin end of the wedge, where every time, just let me finish, every time there is something where they don't like this, no, under the EU net zero trading scheme, you're going to have to comply. That is the thin end of the wedge that we are so concerned about. I'd give way to the honourable gentleman.
Giving way. He hasn't mentioned the many businesses and many confederations of businesses that have welcomed this deal. But you're talking about energy. One energy company that talked about this was Octopus Energy, that said it would bring down people's energy bills rather than increasing them. What would he say to consumers that would prefer their energy bills to be lower?
What I would say to the honourable gentleman is that the renewable energy industry is receiving subsidies of over £10 billion, which is added to all our household bills. The wholesale cost of energy is about between 30 and 35% of the total cost of energy. All of the rest is subsidies, policy costs, transmission costs and profit. So if you scrap net stupid zero, you drive down the prices. Instead, this will actually, it will handcuff us ever more to higher bills. It won't reduce bills in any way at all. I think the Honourable Lady from Walthamstow wishes to come back at me.
I want to ask him just because, as a proud member of Community Trade Union, and indeed all the other trade unions who represent those who work in the steel industry and many of those who will work at the Scunthorpe Works, what does he say to them when they are campaigning for this? Because they recognise, as I said, 75% of our steel exports go to the EU, so that if he cuts off their access to the EU market by making them pay an additional subsidy, he will kill the British steel industry. Does he not have any words of comfort for them about where their jobs will go?
Actually, the Honourable Lady may have forgotten that it was thanks to our intervention that British steel has been saved and the blast furnaces have now been saved because we stood there 6 years ago. I said don't sell British steel to the Chinese, but the Conservative government ignored our advice. Actually, what British steel have consistently said to me over the last 6 years is that it is the cost of energy that drives up the price of steel, and that is the reason why the quantity of steel that we have produced in this country in the last decade has plummeted, because of our high cost of energy, because of the ever-increasing cost of renewable energy. So that is the key problem. It is not, it is about the cost of energy, and that is what has driven down the production of steel, which has reduced by, I think, about half in the last decade. That's why they're so cross with the cost of energy. The opportunity for us is to manufacture and sell more steel here internally into the UK. But the tragedy is, for example, the Ministry of Defence doesn't use either of our two key steel producers as a critical supplier, neither Tata Steel nor British Steel, which it should. Why? Because they're uncompetitive. Why? Because of the cost of energy in our own domestic market. So Surrender 5 is the EU trading scheme, which will be, over the next few years, which will be a serious handicap and handcuff. And then surrender 6 is the passport e-gates, which I know causes some interest, but the reality is that, once again, nothing has been agreed. This is supposedly the great benefit, and yet it turns out it's not agreed. We have no idea when it might commence. Is it this year? Is it next year? And then it turns out no country is obligated to sign up to the supposed access through the e-gates. No, it will be a voluntary process. So actually, we haven't agreed the benefit that we've all been told is the greatest opportunity from the deal. So, in other words, once again, little has been agreed and everything has been conceded. And interestingly, the truth is at the moment, even before this deal, some nations have already allowed us through e-gates, like Portugal. So they already had that opportunity that supposedly is the great benefit of this deal that it turns out they already had. So why do the deal in the first place? The reason this deal has been done, despite all of these great surrenders, Madam Chair, is because this is a Prime Minister who actually didn't want us to leave the EU. In fact, more than that, he didn't want to trust democracy. He wanted to do it again by having a second referendum. And this is a Prime Minister that at one week he says he wants freedom of movement and more immigration, and then the next week he says he wants less immigration. It's hard to keep up. But what we know, I was delighted to give way to the Honourable Lady.
I'm so disappointed, Mrs McVeigh, and a pleasure to serve under you, that we've heard from the Honourable Gentleman and others on the other side, surrender, sinister, stupid, nicely alliterative. But let me give him 3 other words. What about cheaper, faster and more opportunities? This is what this brings, and this is what will bring to the young people of Boston and Skegness as much as it will to the young people of Hackney South and Shoreditch.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for her intervention, but I am absolutely certain that as a result of this deal, nothing will be cheaper. Indeed, we're already seeing the carbon price has gone up, which gives us the first indication. So look, I don't think that this is going to be the great opportunity. I think this is, at the beginning of this week, a catastrophic surrender. We worked so hard to give ourselves freedom of control, freedom from Brexit. I'll give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
Why does he think that nearly every major supermarket disagrees with him?
That's a very good question. What I do know is in my constituency, no one has been in touch. The big logistics companies, the big farmers, none of the supermarkets have got in touch with me. They know my position. Not a single one, Madam Chair, has got in touch with me and says, Richard, you're wrong on this. This is a great deal. So maybe actually the Prime Minister and the government have overstated this point. And maybe what's happened here is that the great opportunities of Brexit, the ability to take back control, be a sovereign nation and make our own independent sovereign deals that we got excited about under the government's leadership last week has all now, it's been given up. It's been strangled. It's been handcuffed. And handcuffed to what? To a failing economic model where the biggest economy, Germany, is in recession, is struggling. It's got even more problems than our own economy. Why, I ask everybody, why would you handcuff yourself to a failing economic model forevermore? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah. Now, I didn't put speeches at the start of this debate, but we've had so many interventions and it's a feisty exchange that it's eaten into the time. So time limits now will, for speeches maximum 8 minutes. Annalise Dodds.
Thank you very much indeed, Mrs McVeigh. It's a real pleasure to speak in this debate with you in the chair, and particularly in a week where I believe that the government acted in our national interest, ensuring a deal that was good for business, good for bills and good for the security of our borders as well. In contrast, the deal that was struck by the Conservatives was, as I indeed put it at the time, as thin as gruel. It's been particularly catastrophic for our exports, which have crashed by 21%. Well, this agreement finally starts to set that right. The measures on carbon trading will boost the Treasury's coffers while reducing businesses' outgoings. And the commitments made on defence will help to deliver for more communities the kind of once-in-a-lifetime reindustrialisation that we're rightly seeing take place in Barrow at the moment. The proposed measures on youth mobility aren't a return to freedom of movement. They're a ladder to opportunity, and I would urge the Minister, as they're developed, to particularly focus on ensuring that low-income and working-class Brits can benefit. I benefited, Mrs McVeigh, from a brief period studying in France, and I hope that the honourable gentleman won't mind if I mention that I believe it's a matter of public record that he worked in France previously. I don't believe the ladder to opportunity that we both benefited from should be kept down on the ground for others. I'm aware that many elements of this deal are still being worked upon, and I commend my right honourable friend in his endeavour in that regard. I do, however, in the remainder of my hopefully brief speech, to underline two critical areas for additional focus for the government. First, and it's already been remarked upon by my honourable friend for Walthamstow, it's really important that the automotive industry's concerns, given the integrated nature of its supply chain, are at the front of the government's mind. I understand the head of the Society for Motor Manufacturers and Traders has said, rightly of course, that the EU remains the UK automotive industry's largest and closest trading partner. So, in his words, this progress towards a deeper strategic partnership is significant, but as we move forward, I urge the government to keep engaging with the SMMT. I know that my right honourable friend has been doing so, and with the broader automotive sector. Yes, on the critical issue of rules of origin, as my friend rightly pointed out, but also on the development of the battery value chain and on the improvement of supply chain resilience as well. I hope those discussions can include relevant trade unions also. I know that workers at BMW Cowley are rightly very keen for that to be the case. Secondly, Mrs McVeigh, I've also already called in this place for the government to consider undertaking a structured dialogue on tech regulation and the defence of democracy with the EU. That's not in order that we take on each other's rules and regulations. We have distinct rules and regulations in this area. Our Online Safety Act is not the same as the Digital Services Act, although they do share many similarities. But a dialogue would enable us to share information, particularly in the face of the kind of onslaught of dis and misinformation that our democracies haven't seen for decades. The reality is that the leadership of many tech companies believe they're above accountability to democratically elected national governments. I saw that very painfully last week when I was in Moldova with a Conservative colleague for an IPU visit. It's been subject to sustained Russian-sponsored disinformation campaigns. We've seen the same kinds of campaigns, albeit at far lower intensity, in many other democracies, including in our country and in many EU nations. We have to recognise that the kind of free and fair elections that are the right of people in our country are also an essential element of our security, just like the other matters covered within this propitious deal. Happy to.
In contrast to the honourable member for Boston and Skegness, she seems to be leaning into cooperating in order to protect. That doesn't mean rule-taking. That doesn't mean surrendering. That doesn't mean being stupid. This is actually leaning in and working with others to protect us all on our own terms.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more with my honourable friend. She's absolutely right that sadly we do face the same threats from autocrats and those who seek to support them, those who seek to disrupt free and fair elections, and we need to ensure that we are sharing information, particularly given the speed of change. And it's already been mentioned that we're seeing, particularly with the development of AI, increased threats to our democracies. We need to be making sure that we're sharing information in that regard. So I do hope the government is going to keep discussions on these matters open. Thank you, and I commend this deal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs McVeigh. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship and to take part in this debate this afternoon, having been first elected to this place
in 2019. I think I missed out on the meaningful votes and the main Brexit wars of a few years ago. But what I did have the privilege of doing in the last Parliament, in the 2019 to 2024 Parliament, was to be a member for all 4.5 years of that Parliament of the European Scrutiny Committee, under, of course, the wonderful chairmanship of Sir William Cash, who his choice to retire at the last election leaves this debate poorer, and indeed the whole House of Commons poorer. And I'm sure he would have had many points to make in this debate. But the reason I bring up the European Scrutiny Committee was actually because of the detailed work that committee did on truly understanding the way that EU law pre-Brexit, and indeed EU law post-Brexit, and the involvement of the European Court of Justice post-Brexit, still pervaded our nation and our country and the way many of our laws were made. And I think it was a deeply regrettable decision that the government took when they won the election last July to disband that committee, not just to lose that parliamentary scrutiny that would have been invaluable on this deal that we are debating today, but also the loss of the expertise of the clerks and the expert advisers that served that committee, who often ensured that parliamentary debate on all matters between ourselves and the European Union were well informed. And I think if the government should do anything after this new deal has been struck, a deal that I do not support and a deal that I do believe sells out the decision of 17.4 million people in 2016, but it should be to re-establish that European Scrutiny Committee. So each and every one of those rules that we will now take will be scrutinised line by line and reported to the whole House and reported to the relevant select committees, so that we can all, whatever side of the Brexit debate we fall, whatever our view of the world may be, can understand where those rules have come from and what they actually mean to our constituents and to our country. I'm delighted to give way.
Whichever side of the Brexit debate we will fall. As the Honourable Lady from Walthamstow said, that's happened now. We are in today's real world. We're in today's real world when there's a war in Ukraine, where there are huge issues with energy crisis, and it's absolutely vital that we work with partners across the world, whether it be the India trade deal or this one. Could he not acknowledge that we are now living in a different world? We should actually, the word Brexit is really no use to us anymore.
I'm grateful to the intervention, but I'm not sure that I fully agree with her analysis there, because what this deal is doing is relitigating Brexit. It is reintroducing dynamic alignment. It is reintroducing a role for the European Court of Justice in many areas that we thought we had put behind us after the last government delivered on Brexit and meant that we left the European Union. And it's actually that point. Someone else wants to have a go. Okay.
Inevitably, in any deal, you have to put something on the table in order to get the benefits of that deal. Could you give me an example of a UK trade agreement where the UK hasn't had to put something on the table?
There is clearly, in any trade negotiation, an agreement that is brought between two countries. The difference between a negotiation, for example, our accession to the CPTPP, or the trade deal light that the government managed with the United States and the Trump administration, or indeed the India trade deal, is that there's no dynamic alignment in that. There is no foreign court that will be the arbiter over UK law, UK standards, and the way that we go about our sovereignty. And the very principle that I believe people voted for Brexit on was that we would be in control. There was a very good reason that the Vote Leave campaign came up with the Take Back Control slogan, because it resonated with the British people. But that only ever means something if we are actually in control. And what this deal that we've seen announced with some glee from the Prime Minister the other day in the chamber of the House of Commons does is give control in many areas, certainly on agri-food, certainly on the carbon trading mechanism, back to the European Union and away from this House, away from this Parliament.
Thanks, Madam Chair. The Honourable Gentleman talks about control. That was mainly motivated by immigration. After the Brexit vote, migration tripled to 900,000. Does he call that control? And also, does he welcome the fall in net migration to 400,000 today? And does he call that reasserting control in migration?
Well, I think he's taking a I don't know whether he was a Leave voter himself. I know many traditional Labour voters did vote for Brexit around the country. I certainly voted for Brexit and campaigned for it myself. But I think he's taking some presumptions. He is taking some presumptions on why people voted. And my central pitch when I was knocking on doors in that referendum was the point around control and sovereignty, and that it would be this Parliament that set our laws. Dynamic alignment blows a huge hole in that. If I might touch very briefly, Mrs McVeigh, on a couple of other factors that have come up in this debate. There is this point that's made that somehow Brexit has been economically damaging. And of course, actually in the government's own rationale, well, it's always good to have an audience laughing, but actually I'm going to quote from their own rationale here. They talk about declining trade and so on from 2018. Well, I hate to break it to them, we hadn't left the European Union in 2018. The Withdrawal Act did not come into effect for years after that point. And so the ONS figures actually show that in 2018, for example, UK food exports to the UK were 10.6 billion. And guess what had happened, Mrs McVeigh, by 2024? They'd gone up to 11.34 billion. So actually, I think we need to have a little greater clarity in this debate where we get the dates right. We actually compare apples with apples rather than apples with pears around the dates that we are actually looking at. Another important area is the area of... I've given way several times. I may well come back if time allows, but I'm aware of the time limit that the Chair has set. Now, of course, my constituency pretty much couldn't be further from the sea than most in England, but we do enjoy a lot of fish in Buckinghamshire. And I am very much aware of just how angry fishermen around the country are, particularly Scottish fishermen. I was debating with SNP members on the BBC yesterday who confirmed how angry their fishermen in Scotland are at this deal. And I think it's important that, once again, we look at some facts. The crude trade gap is actually around 274,000 tonnes. That's in the EU's favour when it comes to fish. But the key point I would make to those that have argued earlier in this debate that this is somehow good because it means we can export more fish to the European Union. Well, we can't export that which we have not been allowed to catch in the first place. And I invite honourable members that have made that point to reflect upon that point a little bit more. OK, I will give way.
Angry, disappointed and betrayed are the words that the chairman of the National Federation of Fishermen's Organisations used to describe the Brexit deal that he voted for. Why did he vote for that deal?
Well, the honourable gentleman, again, is trying to relitigate the past. The deal that the last government did would have seen us able to take back full control of our waters in a year's time. Instead, what we have got is a 12-year deal that gives the EU rights to our fishing waters. I would say that is a point to be angry and dismayed about, not a deal that could have returned total control of our waters next year. Mrs McVeigh, this is not a good deal for the United Kingdom. This is not a good deal that honours the referendum result. This is a deal that I would invite the new government to reflect upon, to reverse course on. They've managed it on winter fuel, so they can manage it on this, and think again. And if they can't do that, at the very least, reintroduce proper scrutiny of EU law having direct effect in this country through a full-time select committee.
Edwards.
And I congratulate my honourable friend for Walthamstow and the honourable member for Boston and Skegness on securing this important debate. And I'm delighted to join my parliamentary colleagues today in celebrating the new agreement that our government has confirmed with the European Union.
Whilst the opposition benches may try to figure out whilst they're all of a sudden against a fishing deal that they wrote, working people, like my constituents in Tamworth, are relieved that they have a government delivering on what's important to them. That's cheaper food in the supermarkets, better policing of our borders, and less needless bureaucracy in the way of free trade. As a member of the Business and Trade Select Committee, I am doubly heartened to see the government's work is in line with many of our published recommendations. In feedback submitted to the committee, the Agricultural Industries Confederation stated that an SPS veterinary agreement has the biggest potential to positively impact UK agricultural supply chain businesses. The government's phytosanitary agreement will enable our farmers to trade and shave pounds off every weekly shop. In collaboration with the Energy Security and Net Zero Committee, I'm actively investigating avenues for reducing commercial energy costs. The National Grid estimates that bringing the European and British energy markets into closer alignment could save the economy £350 million a year. Therefore, I commend the announced links between our emissions trading systems as a positive first step to reducing consumer and business energy costs. After years of unreasonable governments embarrassing us abroad and stifling business at home, Britain is back as proud, sovereign, free and a trading nation. While some in this place try to spin that £360 million of investment in our seaside communities is bad for fishing, my constituents and I will be celebrating cheaper food in our supermarkets, more efficient energy markets and shorter queues at the airport. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms McVeigh, and I'm grateful to be able to make a short contribution to this debate. I'm not going to repeat everything I said in the debate that we had last week, but I just do want to make this point. The Honourable Lady for Walthamstow said we don't want to go back to the old arguments we had about Brexit around the time of the referendum and while we were negotiating the Trade and Cooperation Agreement before we finally left. But that's exactly what the government is doing. Who is it who's trying to turn the clock back? Who is it who's decided that we should rejoin the single market in food and agri-products, having promised that we would not rejoin the single market? It's the Labour government. Yep. And the idea that they should be able to wash their hands of the responsibility that they have to voters for honouring the referendum result is an absolute absurdity. And let's also just remind ourselves, these are the same people who hated the idea of leaving the EU, who campaigned passionately to stay in the EU for ideological reasons, who then refused to accept the referendum result, who desperately tried to pervert the referendum result or get a second referendum, and in their hearts have never, ever really accepted the referendum result. And they long to rejoin. And that is what is the motive behind this. They know they can't rejoin the European Union because the voters won't have it, so they are rejoining by stealth. That's what they're doing. They are rejoining, they've rejoined the single market in agri and food products, which means we are effectively back in the European Union as far as regulation of food and agri-products is concerned, only we don't even have a say over the new laws that are going to be made and imposed on all British food businesses. I give way to my honourable friend.
James McMurdo.
Thank you for giving way. And just on that very same point, I wonder if I might invite you to just elaborate on what you think it might mean by the fact that we did scrap the European Scrutiny Committee. And by we, I mean the government.
Well, I think
Sir Bernard Jenkins.
A mistake. The House of Lords still has a European Affairs Committee, and they've done an inquiry into the reset, in the run-up to the reset. There's been no inquiry by any select committee in the House of Commons about the reset, apart from one committee, the Business and Trade Committee. But my honourable friend and the honourable gentleman are absolutely right that we need to reinstate the European Scrutiny Committee because there will be a flow of new regulations coming out of the European Union which should be scrutinised in the proper way, as we did when we were a member of the European Union, because without that, there is no proper scrutiny in this House at all. Now, I just want to move on briefly to this question about how bad was Brexit really as an economic event. We were told, of course, that the British economy was going to fall off a cliff, that the housing market would collapse, that interest rates would rocket. Actually, none of these things occurred. When we left the European Union at the beginning of 2021, the dial hardly moved. Our economy was growing at roughly the same rate as other European economies in the European Union. Yep.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm really interested in your economic analysis, and I'm interested to know, in his economic analysis, and I'm really interested to know if he really thinks that the economic consequences of Brexit could only possibly have started in 2021 at the moment that we actually left the European Union and not before, once the decision was made.
We were told, for example, by the OBR that there might be a 4% reduction in what our GDP would otherwise have been. That's not occurred. They were wrong. Our economy has continued to grow at roughly the same rate as the other EU economies. Of course, there have been adjustments because the economy has a different trading relationship with the EU. We now have a very deep and comprehensive trading relationship with the EU as opposed to being in the single market. But there are swings and roundabouts. There have been gains in other areas. And of course, the other big advantage is our contributions to the European Union, which used to be very substantial, we're pushing up to 20 billion a year, are now right down. And that's a huge advantage. So given all the exaggeration about how bad Brexit was going to be and about how bad Brexit is, how seriously should we take what the government is now saying about the huge benefits of this so-called reset? I'll give way once more because I need to be brief.
I'm very grateful indeed to the right honourable gentleman for giving way, and I'm listening very carefully to his comments. But I did want to ask him specifically about the issue of goods exports, and this relates to the comments that were made by the member for Mid-Buckinghamshire. I've just looked at House of Commons library analysis, and they've stated that goods exports to the EU exceeded £215 billion in 2017, 18 and 19, but haven't done so in any calendar year since. That came out in April 2025, and were £177 billion in 2024. And also our exports of goods to non-EU countries haven't recovered either. Does he recognise those figures? Thank you.
Actually, what the library doesn't say is that the cause of these declines is because of Brexit. Yes. It doesn't say that.
It does actually say.
And there are all sorts of factors, like, for example, we're closing down the North Sea and we're exporting far fewer fuel exports. For example, we used to import a lot of uncut diamonds and export them to the EU. Well, we don't do that anymore. That was £1 billion a year. And also the basis for I'm not going to give away again. Also the basis for recalculating our trade statistics, that has changed. There was also the effect of what was known as the Rotterdam effect. All these factors have but the point is our underlying economic growth is broadly the same. Now the claims that the Prime Minister was making on Tuesday at the statement, for example, on shellfish, he actually said, the deal means that British goods that have long been off the menu in Europe can regain their true place, including shellfish. And he went on to say, in an astonishing, he mentioned this several times, under the Conservatives' deal, shellfish was locked out, but it can now be sold back into the market. So what are exactly the statistics for shellfish exports to the EU? They declined very substantially between 2019 and 2021, probably because of from 32 million to 25 million, largely because of COVID, I suspect. But then in 2022, they declined a little bit more to 22 million. That's not off the menu. That's not off the menu. 22 million tonnes of shellfish exported to the EU. They went up in 2023 to 23 million, and they've continued broadly at that. They weren't locked out. That's just not true. They weren't locked out. And the fact is we have a different trading relationship. Yes, the EU puts on lots of stupid and time-wasting barriers to trade, but that's because they know that this Labour government are suckers. And they've fallen for this trap, And they think they're going to get rid of all these checks. Well, now we're going to have, under this new arrangement, we're going to have EU vets inspecting British farms and British food producers without any authority from the British government, except that through some kind of agreement. We also know that this agri-food SPS agreement hasn't yet been agreed. And why hasn't it been agreed? There's no start date given by the government for this. We haven't seen the small print. There will have to be legislation. And we don't know how much we will have to pay to the EU for the privilege of having this so-called privileged access. So it just begs the question, given that shellfish wasn't locked out and our exports of shellfish to the EU remain very substantially the same, what else is the government saying that's completely untrue about this deal? I suspect, just as they exaggerated and do exaggerate the disadvantages of being outside the European Union, they're also grossly exaggerating the economic advantages of this deal. I come back to the point. If the referendum decided one thing, it was that we should no longer have our laws made in the European Union and we should no longer have to contribute to the EU budget. Both of these commitments the government made in their manifesto have been betrayed. We've rejoined the single market in food and agri-products, and we're going to start contributing to the European Union once again in terms of money. And finally, I would just, this will have a sting in the tail for the government. Oh yes, I'm afraid all those red wall seats, so-called, are now vulnerable to a sense of betrayal amongst the voters that this government cannot be trusted on even the most fundamental thing. I remind the committee again, the Westminster Hall again, that the 17.4 million voted Leave. That's a good deal more than the 9.7 million that voted Labour and gave Labour their extraordinary majority on such a paltry share of the poll, less than 34%. And the idea that this is a superior mandate and they now have the right to overrule a referendum result is very dangerous territory. It's playing into the hands of the Reform Party, which is the very thing they fear. And I would just end on this point about the EU Scrutiny Committee. It's absolutely vital we have this back. And could the Minister, in his response to the debate, now that we're going to have European regulation being created and applied once again in the United Kingdom, even though we haven't got any say over it, we should be able to scrutinise it properly with a proper committee of scrutiny. And I would be very grateful if he would address that point.
Yeah, well said, Brian. Very good.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. And can I thank my honourable friend Stella Creasy and the honourable member Richard Tice for securing this debate. I really welcome this chance to move on, to let it go, and the chance to test and reflect on the outcome of the EU-UK summit, and also a chance to look to the future and look at what this foundation can help with going forward. So whilst the opposition have really done their best for me to rack my brain back to the 1990s and the debate, the last but one time the Conservatives tore themselves apart over Europe when they were fighting over whether we were rule makers or rule takers, I'll just spend a tiny bit of time talking about the 2016 referendum and how it uncovered and exacerbated division in our country, and how fundamentally regrettable it is that the people opposite today have used such divisive language going forward in terms of surrender, stupidity, hate, suckers, dangerous. This really isn't a sensible way to be talking about the best way to work with our partners in the European Union, which is our largest trading partner. By stark contrast, this EU-UK summit that just completed earlier this week has been grounded in a pragmatic approach to moving forward, and that is reaching out across our country to do the very best for the whole of the UK. So in terms of testing and reflecting on the outcomes of the summit, first question for me is, does it stick to our red lines? And just in response to the most recent remarks, it absolutely does stick to those red lines. No return to the single market, customs union or freedom of movement. Does it support this government's missions that were clearly voted on by this country after an election that was called just a year ago today? Our missions of growth, to support opportunity, to get our country healthy, to tackle climate change and to make our country safer. And on each and every single one of those, it does address this government's missions. Does this UK summit, third, work for the whole of the UK? Just looking around the room today, I am really proud that how many nations and regions of the UK are represented on these benches today. And every single one of us has been able to talk about how this UK-EU summit has benefited our own constituencies. And when I think about why this UK-EU summit work is so important for me, I represent areas with a vast number of small businesses that rely on the impact of this summit by reducing the cost of energy and the cost of actually being able to work in the hospitality sector as well. That is really significant for my constituency, which is one of the great engines of the UK economy. And when I look across the whole room, there are ways in which the UK-EU summit is helping as well. And I would really like to know whether there's nobody in Spalding, in Skegness, that will not be benefiting. And they're really not businesses that will see the opportunity, haulage businesses that will see the opportunity for reduced red tape as a result of this. I strongly doubt that there are none. The next test for me is, does this really fix the foundations for the future? Because that's what I want to come on to next. Does this put us in a good place to build on for some of the other businesses and the other areas that I think we need to see a bit more movement? And I think it does. I think it is a really strong first step going forward. And does it make sure that we can get ourselves and our pets on holiday faster? And yes, it absolutely does. So let's look to the future now. I've spent several minutes on the past, so now I'm going to have spent several minutes on the present, and now I'm going to look to the future as well. So in another area of really important vitality, is there an intervention? Sorry.
No, it's just chuntering. Just chuntering.
Do you have anything to say? There we go.
And I say so generously. I choose to go for my holidays to North Norfolk and Whitby. You don't need a passport to go there. It's very pleasant. I think she'd be enriched by that kind of experience. Okay.
I really hope that he has a wonderful time on his holidays. I will be spending a lot of time in this current recess in the UK at the seaside, and I hope that other people who want to take their holidays in other places will be able to benefit from this EU summit. And I'm sure that some of the benefits of tackling the red tape around making sure our hospitality industry will mean that there are businesses in the UK tourism and hospitality industry that will be strongly welcoming this summit. So looking to the future now, I'm really looking forward, like actually probably uniting the whole room today, more detail on the youth experience scheme. I want to know exactly how constituents, young people across the country will be able to learn by going to places in Europe, learning about their culture, their economy and their history as part of their own education. And I think it's important to see some detail in that going forward. And I do really want to hear more in future summits about cabotage and carnet and how it will be easier. Again, that will help in the haulage industry as well. I understand how cabotage and carnet will be discussed at future summits in order to secure the vitality of our touring orchestras, many of which are based in my constituency, and actually touring artists getting over to Europe and making sure that the West End remains such a thriving centre of culture in the UK. I'm grateful for the chance to reflect on the summit, and I look forward to hearing from the Minister and those that have brought the debates on how we might move forward with this summit.
Sir John Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Joseph Chamberlain, one of my great political heroes, said that in great deeds something abides. And perhaps the greatest deed of my parliamentary lifetime was our decision to leave the European Union. Made greater still by the fact that it was a decision taken by the British people against the advice of most of their political leaders from across the spectrum. So suddenly the people spoke, and they spoke clearly about their intentions, which contradicted the long-standing prejudices of most of the British establishment. Now, what endures of that, of course, is our right to self-government, and that lies at the heart of the short debate we're having today. It's the affirmation of parliamentary sovereignty. And why that, of course, as we all know, matters, is because our legitimacy is afforded to us by the choice that people make to send us here, and the fact that we're answerable to them in a way that those who exercise power in the European Union have never been directly accountable. It's true that we elected MEPs. Almost no one knew who they were. I didn't know the Tory MEPs were, let alone the ones from the other parties. And MEPs, or former MEPs, will often tell you they receive very few contacts with the people in their constituencies. All their postbag was a fraction of what we get in a single week, let alone over time. So that interaction, which is at the heart of the legitimacy I've described, just isn't there. And of course, much of the governance in the European Union wasn't made by people elected at all. The character of the way rules are made there creates a very different, a very different connection between bureaucrats and elected people. So that sovereignty that was produced by the referendum result is something precious and something that should be valued by every single member of this House, regardless of which party we're in. Now, what does this deal do in respect of that sovereignty? Well, I have reservations about the youth mobility scheme, not because I don't think there are people in Lincolnshire who want to take advantage of it. I didn't say that, by the way. I didn't say that. I'm not going to defend my friend from Boston, but I will defend him on this basis, if I may say so. The exact figures for his constituency are there are 13,596 people living there who either come from Eastern Europe, Central Europe, or further afield, Bulgaria, Romania, and so on. And the influx of those people over a short period of time had a dramatic effect on the character of that part of Lincolnshire. And immigration more generally, free movement, had a devastating effect on this country because it displaced investment in domestic skills, without doubt. It changed workplaces, I think drove down wages, for example. Many of the people who came weren't unionised. They weren't able to make the case to their employers with the same confidence that domestic workers do, and rightly so. And it stultified our economy by fixing it in a labour-intensive, low-skill profile. And that is bound to damage productivity and make us less competitive. What we actually need to build was a high-skill, high-tech economy to compete internationally, and free movement damaged that prospect. And the fear about the youth mobility scheme, the youth experience scheme, it keeps changing names, and that in itself leads to a certain degree of scepticism. I won't put it any more strongly than that, is that it will bring people here who will want to work competing with our young people in Lincolnshire and across constituencies represented in this chamber today. And that may be about seasonal jobs, part-time jobs, first jobs for people getting into the labour market. It may be about other opportunities. But I do have profound doubts about it. Now, we wait to see the detail, and maybe the government share my view. I hope they do. But I can understand entirely my neighbours' reservations about it, and the reservations that, as I say, I share. I won't speak about fishing because others have, except to say that fishing is always a bargaining chip in these negotiations. It was Edward Heath, a Conservative Prime Minister, allegedly, that sold out the fishermen when we first joined. And that, if you remember, Madam Deputy Speaker, you won't remember it because, of course, you're a very young person. But talking of young people, as we were earlier, and the Honourable Lady, talking about exactly that. But you won't remember it personally, but you will know it. That game was a last-minute deal. Remember when we were trying to? He was so desperate to join the European Union. He was persuaded at the last minute, as we were about to enter that he needed to trade off our fishermen's rights in that way. So that's certainly a concern, but so too is this issue of regulation and regulation, because
Sitting will be suspended for 15 minutes for a division in the House.
more excitement later.
Debate resumes. I call Sadiq Al-Hassan. Sorry, I was told you had finished, Sir John. Oh, right. Well, none of us would want to deny listening to Sir John. So, back to you, Sir John.
I wondered if the Honourable Gentleman was going to finish my speech for me, Mr. Vickers, but I'm not sure it would have been quite in the same vein in which I intend to continue. So we've talked a bit about the youth mobility scheme, the youth movement scheme, the youth experience scheme, call it what you will. Of course it's true that some young people want to go abroad, but many more young people from abroad will want to come here. We spoke a little before you came, Mr. Vickers, about the consequences of that. Now, things have changed since we left the European Union, and the principal change internationally has been the greater need for national economic resilience, epitomised, if you like, in the COVID pandemic and then the European war which followed it in Ukraine. Never has it been clearer that Britain needs to become increasingly resilient. And that does mean protecting our industry to some degree. It certainly means manufacturing more of what we need, and it means growing more of the food that we consume in this country, shortening supply lines with many benefits, environmental and other. But fundamentally, that's about taking a national view of our economic interests. And of course, Britain cooperates and collaborates with others. But as I said to the Honourable Lady from Walthamstow when she opened this debate, there is a world of difference between cooperation and governance. In a sense, that has permeated considerations of this subject since we started these discussions back in the late 1950s. For a long time, many of those who favoured European governance pretended it was a matter of logistics rather than principles, that it was details rather than essentials, that it was, as we heard again today, cooperation, not of governance. But fundamentally, this is about the difference between supranational government and collaborative measures, treaties and so on, between sovereign nations. That is the heart of this debate. And I will give way in 1 second. And it is unfortunate that when we joined the European Union, then you'll remember, Mr. Chairman, because you were a campaigner, even in those distant days, against it. It was described, indeed it was labelled, the common market. No sense there that we'd be giving up our sovereignty, no sense that it would have any effect on our political structure or system of government, just a trading association. How things have changed. And I know the Honourable Lady welcomes that change because she fought the Brexit referendum result in an honourable way, but nonetheless a stubborn way, if I might say so. I wonder if she's as stubborn now. I happily give way to her.
This is always flattering when people talk about imitation. I just wanted to ask the Honourable Gentleman, he's talking about his argument there being a difference between cooperation and governance. What is it about Europol and our ability to share information, work together to tackle crime, to hold to account those who damage our constituents, that he found so distasteful that he would support not working with Europol? Because his government chose on his argument not to work with Europol, and I believe that has damaged our ability to tackle crime in the way that this summit will address that. So what was so distasteful about that body that he couldn't cooperate with them?
Well, I say to the Honourable Lady, not in a way that's patronising or pompous at all, that I can speak with a bit more authority about that than she can, because I was the former Security Minister. I'm currently a member of the Intelligence and Security Committee, and I, of course, was once responsible for countering serious organised crime in government. And so I came across a lot of the need to cooperate and share data. She will remember we were never part of the Schengen arrangement, although we did have access to the Schengen database. We were never part of European governance over security, although we did share information with European partners. You will also note the key relationship with us in terms of security is the Five Eyes relationship, is the relationship with countries beyond the European Union, America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. That is the core security partnership. Of course, we cooperate with other countries across the globe, And to be frank, that's not really about governance, is it? That's about exactly the kind of collaboration that I described had always been part of the way this country had dealt with its affairs internationally. Now, I'm not going to take another intervention because I know, Mr. Chairman, you're beginning to tire, even you, are beginning to tire of even me, if I can put it that way. And so I'm going to move rapidly to my concluding remarks, and they are concerned this issue of trade and regulation. Now, it's true that in my constituency, and I think a member who's no longer in place asked me to offer a balanced view of that. It's true that exporters from my constituency in the horticulture sector will benefit from smoother transitions of ports. That's undoubtedly true. But it's also true that there is a risk that this will encourage to import more food at a time when we need to do less of that. We need to grow and make more of our own food, what we consume. And I was with the APPG on fresh produce yesterday, which I chair, and a major haulier and farmer and grower at that meeting said that he feared just that. The problem with this deal, and I meet, by the way, farmers and growers and haulers in my constituency every single week, such is my diligence, Mr. Chairman, and he was most concerned about the possible impact of that additional ability of the Europeans to flood our markets with foreign food. So I'm going to end with this. Joe Chamberlain also said that we should carry on, even distant ages, with the great traditions of the British flag. In the end, this is about just that. It's about how you see the nationhood, how you regard the national interest. Now, there are those on the left, I don't say they're in this chamber, some affected by doubt about nationhood, some even afflicted by guilt about our past, that don't see the national interest in the way I do. I don't think that includes the Minister, by the way, as well no doubt here when he sums up. But we do have to, in the end, come to the conclusion, the logical conclusion of Brexit that always happened since, that the national interest should be, ought to be, the supreme consideration of any government.
Thank you, Chair. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. After 8 years of delay and no small degree of chaos brought upon us by the previous Conservative government, we should all be proud of this Labour government and the strides they're making to heal the wounds of the past and start the long and arduous journey of rebuilding those bridges. I'm a strong believer in a closer relationship with our nearest neighbours and welcome further work on this in the future. The agreement reached at the UK-EU summit contains progress on many areas which will be welcome to my constituents in North Somerset. Closer cooperation on defence, greater opportunities for farmers, making life easier for holidaymakers. There is much to applaud. The previous deal, haphazardly slapped together last minute by Boris Johnson, worked for no one. It left our businesses scrambling to cope with delays and excessive red tape. As we embark on undoing the damage he did, I know many businesses in my constituency, based around Bristol Port, will welcome the progress this government is making to reduce friction in trade and reopen opportunities to export to Europe. The SPS agreement, in particular, is a good first step and will be welcomed by many farmers across fields of North Somerset. However, we must now build upon this momentum and must take care not to forget the other issues, such as zoo animal transfers, which for zoos such as Noah's Ark in Wraxall are a vital part of their conservation efforts, itself a cornerstone of their identity. Such transfers have declined 80% since 2019, greatly impacting international conservation breeding programmes and unnecessarily endangering a great number of species. The opportunities present in this agreement are particularly striking for UK defence companies. As Europe rightfully comes together in the wake of Putin's invasion of Ukraine, we must seize the moment and embrace our position as one of Europe's leading militaries, linking arm in arm with our friends across the Channel. This will not just be good for our security, but for our economy too. Our long and prestigious military history has given us a wealth of supremely talented defence companies, not least a plethora of small and medium enterprises in Portishead, to whom access to EU defence funds could be transformational. Mr. Chairman, whatever the outcome of the referendum, I think it's fair to say that Brexit has increasingly become a case of buyer's remorse, with many of us wishing we had kept the receipt. I applaud my colleagues and friends in the government for finally getting the ball rolling, and I, like many of my constituents, eagerly await to hear the details of what will come next.
Both of the Honourable Lady and all the gentlemen for seeking the debate today and giving me the opportunity to make some comment. As usual, it feels as though the Northern Ireland situation is front and centre, and yet it doesn't appear that government has managed to get it right. I cast my mind back to the referendum of 2016. I know exactly where I voted. I know where the majority of my constituents in Strangford voted. We voted to leave. Yet that was overtaken by the withdrawal bill of January 2020, and then overtaken again, modified indeed, by the Windsor Framework of February 2023. It has put us in this Euro limbo where we don't know where we are in relation to did we vote for the Brexit, or did we get the Brexit we voted for? And the fact is we didn't, and that's really disappointing. The DUP have been urging the Prime Minister to unashamedly make the case for the primacy and integrity of the United Kingdom and its internal market in their discussions with Brussels. For too long, communities and businesses throughout Northern Ireland have been in the Euro limbo zone, paying the price of daring to leave Europe, daring to even think it. This deal would hopefully reset this, and yet I'm not convinced that the aim has been achieved. Whilst I welcome some of the aims behind the Prime Minister's objectives and negotiations, yet I'm not convinced that Europe is determined to finally do the right thing by this nation, and particularly by and for Northern Ireland. Whilst it's true that my party, both in Westminster and across the Assembly, will take time to scrutinise in detail what has been agreed, and will make our judgments solely through the prism of how it impacts upon Northern Ireland, businesses and its people, and our place within the United Kingdom, as is our role and responsibility, and something which members on all sides of the House have been doing throughout this long process of Brexit. It's also true that we hold the belief that government should be radical in moving on from the Windsor Framework and not tinkering round the edges of it, because that doesn't do anything. It just makes the water more muddied. The Prime Minister cannot, on one hand, suggest that this deal restores trust between the United Kingdom and the EU, edging us towards closer cooperation, yet on the other hand continues to build oppressive border control infrastructure at Northern Ireland ports. To see the limitations put on products being shipped or parcel posted to Northern Ireland still boggles the mind, and the patience as well of all my constituents who regularly contact me about it. And yet the fact is that we're hammering away at an infrastructure which should not be necessary within this United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. I must express, I have to, on behalf of my fishermen, express extreme disappointment in the government's decision to grant EU vessels 12 years of continued access to UK waters, which is a real blow for our fishing communities. For places like Portavogie and my constituency of Strangford, and through the fish producers' organisations, through them organisations, I speak for those in Ardglass and Kilkeel as well, because quite simply the MP for there doesn't bother coming here, and therefore has no contribution in the chamber to this debate. Yet in all, their short monies have amounted to some £10 million over the last number of years, and no representation in this chamber. So on behalf of all of those, I want to speak up for the fishing. It's a vital economic lifeline, and this move will create uncertainty. Sadly, in these negotiations, it appears the needs of our fishing communities has not been uppermost, and we find that we have now yielded to EU demands. Once again, the Prime Minister could have done more to protect local fishing businesses, but instead handed over continued access to UK waters until 2038, and this must not be allowed to stand. The 12-year deal means foreign vessels continue to compete for limited stock, more pressure on small operators, and another blow to coastal communities already struggling to survive, those in Portavogie, those in Ardglass and those in Kilkeel as examples. So I'm asking Government and the Minister to urgently explore how it can support the industry in other ways that helps alleviate the consequences of the 12-year deal. To be fair to the Prime Minister, and the question on Tuesday in relation to the trade deal, he did mention there'd be £360 million available for fishing communities, and perhaps the Minister can indicate how much of that will come to Northern Ireland. If it's within his remit, of course, to be able to do that, but it would be helpful. Moving on, Mr Chairman, the SPS agreement may help ease the flow of trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, but it will not be a silver bullet to the host of problems created by the application of EU law, specifically in Northern Ireland only. Because that's what's happening to us. And I know I'm the only Northern Ireland representative here today, but I do speak on behalf of many others who do attend meetings and this chamber and make their contribution. For example, it does not address issues around customs, particularly business-to-business movements and other barriers to trade, not least in relation to manufacturing, to product standards and the supply of veterinary medicines. Absolutely unbelievable the problems that have been created for veterinary medicines. I'm hoping the Minister can give us some response to that particular one. I know the Minister always tries to be helpful, and I appreciate that, genuinely do. And these are questions that we are seeking all the time on behalf of our constituents. There was supposed to be a body set up to address the veterinary medicines issue, but it never really got off the ground. With the result that we're no clearer to seeing where we are in relation to it. Only certain veterinary medicines we're able to receive in Northern Ireland, and there's many other ones we can't. And the same thing applies to medications for human beings as well. The whole thing is quite incredible. So we will assess what progress has been made, but we will also assess whether architecture remains in place that puts Northern Ireland in a different position to the rest of the United Kingdom. The work to see such architecture removed, indeed must be removed, is a priority of government if government is serious about solving what we refer to, not in any funny way, the hokey-cokey Northern Ireland situation. We are in, we're out, and we're truly shaken all about. And it's a time for the dance to end and to return to our solid position within the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. When I came to this chamber in 2010, I made a point of reiterating the position of Northern Ireland, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. I know it means a lot to you, Mr Chairman, and it means a lot to us probably on this side of the chamber. I hope it's equally important to others on the other side of the chamber, and time will tell if that's the case. Full restoration of Northern Ireland's place within the United Kingdom, of course, includes removing the application of EU law in our country and the internal Irish Sea border it creates. And it asks the Minister to outline how and when this can take place. I know the Minister really does try, genuinely. I mean that, I'm being honest and sincere. I know when I ask him questions in the chamber, it always comes back trying to address the question. And I appreciate that, by the way. I want to put that on record. So I look forward to hearing what he will say in return. Last comment, Mr Chairman. The Prime Minister and his Cabinet have a vision for our European cooperation. And the Honourable Member referred to cooperation is okay, but it's whenever the sovereignty is lost, as it seems to be. But this vision must have the Northern Ireland scenario in firm focus, and with no more double vision. One nation, one relationship, one way forward, and a one solution that fits the people of Portavogie, of Perth, of Portsmouth and of Pontypridd equally. And that's the way it should be. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Lucas, and thank you for calling this debate. As I said a moment ago in an intervention, the Chairman of the National Federation of Fishermen's Organisations used the words angry, disappointed and betrayed to describe the previous government's Brexit deal, a deal that many of the members opposite voted for. And so I'm rather bewildered, really, to understand why this has become the biggest criticism of this new deal with Europe, that it continues a deal that they voted in favour of. I presume that at the time they voted in favour... An intervention? Yeah.
Many of us on these benches weren't happy with the direction of travel of previous Conservative governments. Let's put that on the record. Okay, we didn't support the EU. I've never supported the EU. I first campaigned to leave when I was a student, when we'd only just joined it. Okay, so he's right that we didn't agree with that, and what this does is to perpetuate it for 12 years. So if it was bad then, it's worse now.
Well, I appreciate his candour, and I share his views on the previous Conservative government. But I would say it's just grown up, isn't it, that when you have a negotiation, you have to put something on the table in order to get something in return. And clearly they felt at the time that putting that on the table was a price worth paying for some greater benefit. Now, what this new deal actually does is put nothing extra onto the table. It continues. Well,
on that very point, it's been reported in the media this afternoon that a very senior president of one of the biggest regional fishery committees in France has, and I quote Mr Vickers, said, "We couldn't have hoped for better. We are very satisfied and relieved. This changes a lot of things. If we no longer had access to British waters, we would have suffered a significant loss of revenue." In whose interest does he think this deal was actually struck?
Well, they're clearly delighted that the situation that he previously voted for has continued, and this is called international trade, and it's how trade works. We buy things and we sell things. But what I think many people are confused by is when you've got supermarkets like Asda, Morrison's, and Marks and Spencer's, when you've got producers like Scottish Salmon, British Meat Producers Association and Dairy UK, when you've got the defence sector like BAE Systems, when you've got the Chamber of Commerce, the Federation of Small Businesses and the Confederation of British Industry all lining up to say that this is a good deal for the economy, they have nobody backing their side of the argument. And that's because I think they know that really. I think they know deep down that this is a good deal for their constituents.
Just point out that supermarkets tend to be interested in their balance sheets and their profits, not in democracy and accountability, which is what this debate really is about. But could you just explain to the House, what concessions did the EU make in this deal?
Well, as has been said already, increased access for British goods into the European markets. And I will come on to some other...
I mean, there's needs to be some cold hard reality about this, that what the previous government seems to be suggesting was some kind of cod wars where our navy might have had to been deployed in order to maintain the idea that nobody else could fish. Does he agree with me that one of the benefits of what's been struck now is the barriers to actually selling the fish that you catch? Absolutely. The reasons why there has been such a fall, a third in the exports of fish from the United Kingdom, the market that there is for our fishing communities face many challenges, not least the myths of the last government. We need to give them a market, and that's what this deal will do.
100% correct, and I don't think that there's any member in this place that hasn't met with businesses in their constituency that previously exported to Europe who haven't heard the tales of woe from the deal that the previous government negotiated. And that's why so many people are lining up to say that this represents a good deal for them. And I'll tell you now what my constituents voted for when they voted for Brexit. They voted for two things. They voted to be made better off, and they voted to control immigration. And what have we seen in the last 5 years has actually been, I don't like the word betrayal that's been bandied around in this debate, but it has been a betrayal, actually, of the promise that was made to them. In 2010, the year that the Conservatives took office, annual asylum claims were just 18,000. Barely anybody arrived in the UK by small boat. That remained relatively constant up until Brexit. So what happened? Well, first, because they told people that cooperation with our friends in Europe was the problem, they pulled Britain out of the Dublin Agreement, meaning that we could no longer return people to the first country where they claimed asylum. And don't take my word for it. Let's hear what the Shadow Home Secretary was found to have said in a recording leaked this week. He said, because we're out of the European Union now, we're out of the Dublin III regulations. So we can't any longer rely on sending people back to the first place where they claimed asylum. When we did check it out, just before we exited the EU transitional arrangements, we did run some checks and found that about half the people crossing the Channel had claimed asylum previously elsewhere in Europe and therefore could have been returned. Well, I hear the question, why weren't they returned? I wasn't in the previous Conservative government to answer it, but what is absolutely clear is that what people voted for actually got worse, didn't it? They were promised... Yeah, I will give way.
According to the House of Commons Library, in 2018, out of more than 5,000 requests under Dublin 3, just over 200 were granted. This is not the silver bullet, and never was, that he imagines it to have been.
Perhaps he's disagreeing with his shadow. Perhaps he's disagreeing with his shadow foreign secretary, because I was quoting his words. But isn't it also the case that one of the other things that Brexit did was it ended our cooperation over policing? It ended intelligence sharing. And so can I welcome the fact that with this deal, the government has negotiated access for the EU facial imaging data to help catch people smugglers and dangerous criminals, and for increased cooperation to track down rapists, murderers and drug lords? Isn't that also something that the European Union has put on the table that Britain benefits from?
So the National Crime Agency and the security services work cooperatively with our neighbours in Europe, and always have. And that cooperation has perpetuated since Brexit, before Brexit. A lot of it, of course, happens under the radar by nature, but it is not true to say we don't have that kind of collaborative relationship with other nations when our national security and theirs is concerned.
And I'm sure the Minister will answer this point in his summing up, but it's my understanding that we don't have access, actually, to the facial recognition, and I think that is really important to help us to better police our borders. And this is the simple reality, that the Brexit that we were promised didn't do the things that people promised it would do, and that's why we need a reset in relations.
I just wonder what the member opposite might say to apologise to my constituent, who has now been waiting, I believe, over 12 years for justice to be done in the murder of her son, which happened in Greece, and for those responsible to be extradited to Greece. And the abolition of the European arrest warrants that happened under Brexit has made that harder. A real example of the damage done by the approach to crime and security under the previous government. The member opposite is shaking his head. I would invite him to meet Sharon Matthews. She's an extraordinary woman who's fought for justice for her son Tyrone. Brexit has made that harder.
Thank you. To me, it's just so obvious that improved cooperation with all of the countries just 20 miles off our shore can benefit our security, can benefit our trade, and that's what this reset is seeking to do. It's not dragging us back into Europe. I think that's a nonsense, and I'm not seeing any credible person saying that. And finally, if I may, just on the point, the member for South Holland, who holidays in North Norfolk, I'll be joining him in North Norfolk this summer. But I do have constituents who, not personally, I hasten to add, but my family will be there this summer too. But we're not just here. Well, maybe we could rehash this debate. But I do think we're not just here to represent our own interests. We're here to represent the interests of our constituents, and I do have constituents who will benefit from some of the new arrangements, the e-gates, but also the pet passports, and that includes constituents who rely on guide dogs. And so I'm particularly grateful for that measure being negotiated. And in conclusion, I really think it's time to stop trying to play the greatest hits of 2019. I realise that made them popular at the time, but we've moved on. We have left the European Union, and now is time to have a mature and sensible and cooperative relationship with our neighbours, because that's what will protect British jobs, and it's what will help our constituents to have cheaper food and a better quality of life.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Vickers. And can I pay tribute to the two members who brought the debate? I mean, it is a case of singing the greatest hits of the past. I recognise singing the old songs in a sort of beautiful duet between the two of them, presaging some appalling coalition one day. I particularly pay tribute to the honourable lady who I recognise her expertise and her interest in this topic. And she invoked, speaking of greatest hits, she invoked Elsa in Frozen. I recognise the self-identification of all people. Her soul spiralling, her soul spirals with frozen fractals. But she has a warm heart underneath. We do know in that film, of course, what happened at the end, which is that Elsa returned to the castle. And I think that is indeed the ultimate purpose of members speaking in this debate. They do want to return into the embrace of the EU. And I honour that, and I accept that they were not happy with the result of the referendum. I wouldn't have been happy if it had gone the other way, and I wouldn't have given up campaigning to leave. I wish there were more honesty on that side of the House, nevertheless, to recognise that what is being debated here is the first step to rejoin. That is the underlying purpose, because all the arguments that have been made against the previous deal were really arguments against Brexit. Yeah. And all the arguments that are being made in support of this arrangement are arguments for rejoin, particularly, as we've just heard, so very eloquently put by the honourable member who spoke before. The case for cooperation in Europe is really a case for rejoining. Happy to give way, yeah.
And the point is, if they're prepared to compromise on dynamic alignment for food and agricultural products, where is any issue of principle as a barrier to prevent them extending that cooperation on other products or other fields of European law where they think it is ideologically convenient for them to do so? The only problem, of course, is they think they're currying favour with the European Union by doing so. They are going to be disappointed because the EU will simply ask for more concessions without making any concessions of their own.
Well, I'm very grateful, and of course, my honourable friend is right. Indeed, and I want to quickly cite the very good article in The Spectator last week by Oliver Lewis, who was the deputy negotiator for the Brexit deal and then for the trade agreement, who wrote rather wearily about recognising the terms that have been agreed by this government, because they were the terms that our government continually resisted in those negotiations. And his point, echoing my honourable friend's point, there was the extent to which the way the EU works, that it forces agreement on headline principles, which then, over the course of time, are translated into concrete policy, and where a thin end of the wedge can be driven in, as it can be here, as we've seen with this agreement, more and more follows. And that's exactly what we should anticipate. So what we have here, and it's worth pointing out how thin the terms of this agreement are, how much detail still remains to be worked out. What we have conceded is a set of principles which will allow ever closer alignment and submission to the regime that we painfully left some years ago. So we see it coming, the submission to the European Court of Justice, an agreement on rule-taking, as my honourable friend has pointed out, a return to the single market in agribusiness, and of course paying money into the EU budget. These were the explicit things on which, in fact, all of our parties in this House committed not to ending when we agreed with the outcome of the referendum. And in 2019, both main parties agreed to abide by. In 2024, agreed to abide by and explicitly ruled out submission to the European Court, paying money, return to the single market, all of which has now been agreed in principle by the government. So it is only a set of principles, but they are bad principles, and they represent a betrayal of Brexit and of our manifestos. So I don't want to, Mr. Vickers, I won't take the House's time with going through the specifics, because other members have done so very well. I do want to quickly point out how thin these agreements are. I mean, on e-gates, I mean, there will be some benefit for the door-to-door and visiting community that some of us have in some of our constituencies. But it is not a great achievement. And indeed, it's not even an achievement for this summer. So it might be that the member for Clacton is enjoying his holiday. I hope he is in France. I don't think he would have benefited from this deal, although probably he's gone through an e-gate already, because there are already many e-gates that British citizens can use going to and fro. But that arrangement will still need to be negotiated with each member state operating its own independent policy in this regard. We've discussed food. I won't go on about that, other than we recognise that we've agreed to take their laws, but we do not have detail yet. And because we export so little, any benefit from any reciprocal arrangement is going to greatly benefit the EU at the expense of our exporters. Happy to give way.
Just to illustrate that point, looking at the figures, Britain, the UK is the EU's biggest export market. We receive about 51 billion euros worth of goods from the EU and return about 15.4 billion. So there's no doubt about where the balance lies there. And I think making the point that emphasising the point he made, the problem is that so much of this is smoke and mirrors. I mean, when you hear about realignment being dynamic or about subsidiarity, as we used to hear, these are terms that are used to disguise exactly the kind of pernicious detail that he set out.
I am very grateful, and absolutely, I'm afraid to say that the argument against EU membership, which was the trade imbalance, remains, and it has only grown with time. So I won't talk about our unhappy fish, Mr. Vickers. We hear enough about those poor creatures. But likewise on defence, no detail in the plan other than an expectation of this new procurement arrangement, other than an expectation that we will be contributing financially to that. No detail on the carbon trading arrangement other than a clear expectation of higher taxes and rule taking through the emissions scheme. And then on free movement, we are unclear. It talks about the terms to be mutually agreed. So what those terms might be, how many people will be coming, what commitments of support for them, with the housing, public services, benefits, what happens if they refuse to leave. All of that still remains unclear, and I'm very worried about the direction of travel. The good news, Mr. Vickers, just to conclude, is that none of this is real. These are all headline principles. And although, as I say, the expectation is that the EU, having forced the famously legalistic Prime Minister of ours to sign up to a set of agreements, will then induce him to believe that these are binding commitments and that he will have to honour them in practice. I implore him not to, and I implore the Minister to consider we don't have to fulfil these terrible terms. Just lastly on the economy, it is worth pointing out, while people talk about the decline of trade since Brexit, trade was declining substantially long before Brexit. The EU is a declining corner of the world's economy, and the direction of travel has not changed much. So, and the fundamental point is, economically, Brexit has been largely a non-event. As my honourable friend has said, the underlying realities have remained largely untouched by Brexit. Obviously, our economy was badly hit by COVID and the Ukraine war, and subsequently by the very bad budget. And again, I'll admit some economic mistakes made by the last government. Let's be honest. But fundamentally, the problems have been not related to Brexit. So just to invoke some heroes of the last Parliament, particularly John Redwood, the great economic prophet of recent times. John Redwood shrugs at Brexit, but Bill Cash rejoices, because fundamentally this was not an economic decision that the British people made. It was about the restoration of sovereignty. And what it did was restore the possibility of good government to our country. I'm afraid to say we didn't get good government immediately after Brexit, and we certainly don't have it now. Many mistakes have been made and continue to be made, particularly by this new government. But we now have the opportunity to govern ourselves in a way that will bring about the prosperity of the British people. Just to quickly acknowledge the point made by the member for Strangford, we still haven't fixed the ongoing saga of Northern Ireland, and I deeply regret that the arrangements there persist in this most unsatisfactory way. But the point about this new agreement is that it is clearly the declaration of intent to move back within the orbit of the EU and ultimately to rejoin. And let me end by echoing the call made by many members on both sides, and I honour the member for Walthamstow for her support for this. It is very, very important that we do restore the European Scrutiny Committee, and I hope the Minister will agree with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vickers. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and congratulate the members who secured this really important debate today. I represent a city that has phenomenal ties to Europe. Edinburgh has been made by Europeans and continues to be a big European player. But that predated our membership of the EU, and it endures after Brexit. And I make that point because over the pendulum of my life, I'm in my late 30s, I'm staring middle age in the face, and my whole adult life has been a continual movement of increasing confrontation, of increasing aggression, of increasing mistrust in the relationship between the EU and the UK. And what I hope is this summit marks the point at which that stops, and we stop the continued degradation of that most important of relationships. And let me be clear, I am not saying the pendulum should swing back towards rejoining the EU, no matter how much everyone says that. Because and there are people out there who say that, but what I say to people who say that, and what my party says to people who say that, is not to fall into the trap that the Brexiteers do, which is to become too nostalgic and long for something in the past rather than facing the future. We don't need to go back to what our previous relationship with the EU was. We need to reset it for modern times, and that's what the announcement from the government in the EU does. Because whatever the structures of our relationship with the EU, on the big global issues of our time, there's huge overlapping strategic alignment. Whether that is the role of technology and data, when we are talking about confronting climate change and the energy transition, on the rise of China and the menacing role of Russia, our strategic interests we share very much with the Europeans, and we need to work with them to achieve our goals there. So that's why I welcome these important steps to reset that relationship. On defence and security particularly, but also on agri-food, on SPS, on energy, as other honourable members have said. It's fantastic to see those. I would particularly point out they are really important for Scotland. I'm delighted to be delivering for my constituents on the promises that I and the Labour Party made to them in the election. So it's quite perplexing to find there's no SNP members here to discuss our relationship with Europe, because they've spent the last 10 years arguing for greater access for Scotland to the energy market, for a youth scheme, for access to Erasmus, for greater access to EU markets for Scottish food and drink, which is exactly what this agreement stands to produce. Exactly what they've been calling for all these years. So of course they've called all surrender. Now, people say that reform deal in grievance. Let me tell you, they have nothing on the SNP. I want particularly, in the brief time I have, to talk specifically about border security and home affairs, because as a member of the Home Affairs Select Committee, I think there are some very significant steps that are here in this announcement. And as the member for the Cities of London said, that will be central to the Labour government's promise to our mission to make the streets safer. Dealing with things like upstream migration, practical solutions to returns, record sharing and cybercrime are utterly critical. And let us be clear, assertions of national sovereignty mean nothing to cross-border criminals. We have to deal with the problem at source. International crime, especially immigration crime, is by definition a cross-border phenomenon, and so it requires a cross-border response, and that means cooperation with the neighbouring countries who face the same issues. Before being elected 10 years ago, I was the Justice and Home Affairs Attaché at the British Embassy in Paris. We dealt with things like Europol, European arrest warrants, data sharing on criminals having a massive impact on the people represented by this House of Commons. And we also, so I know the importance of these concrete measures that do not grab headlines but make a real difference to people's lives. And also, in those days, we dealt with the UK-EU, UK-France channel. And in those days, 10 years ago, we didn't have small boats. That wasn't something we had to worry about. Obviously, we do now. Something in the interim changed. Now, we need to work out what that was and address it. I would argue, and we've been discussing this, the lack of the Dublin Convention makes it structurally so much harder to deal with the small boats crisis. And nobody in this room would argue our constituents are not demanding that we deal with that crisis. So that is why I cannot understand. Yes, I was, but I will take an intervention.
Of course, the Honourable is right. There are all kinds of existential threats. which face this country and other countries too. But government's job is to deal with the effect of those threats as they alter life here in Britain. Cooperation is part of that, but in no way does it absolve national governments from taking responsibility for those threats in relation to national and local priorities. And mass migration is a really good example of that, which I regard as the greatest existential threat, actually, amongst many. That has to be dealt with, in effect, in this country.
So I thank the Honourable Member for that intervention. I agree with him that the point of a government is to actually deal with the challenges that the country faces at the time. So I would argue it was insane to stand like King Canute on the shores of this country asserting that a Rwanda scheme was going to work when it clearly, patently, and all the expert advice was that it would not. And I would also say that if you want to deal with the issues that migration brings, access to Eurodac, the fingerprinting scheme, access to the Schengen information system, access to the Dublin regulation, that would be a concrete thing we could do to actually make a difference to the immigration threats and challenges that we're facing. I would argue that just simply asserting we're losing sovereignty, at any time anyone tries to constructively, substantively deal with those issues, does not achieve what the point that I think he was trying to make. Just very briefly to sum up, because I know we're running out of time, you cannot assert control and crack down on crime without these kind of instruments. So I'm really pleased to see that there are issues dealing with those in this agreement. So can I ask the Minister if he can give us any information on what the plans will be on SIS2 and on Eurodac, and specifically on the Dublin Convention? And as we've heard, I may be being joined in that by the Shadow Home Secretary, who clearly wants to see us join that too. And then just on a final point, I couldn't, as a member for Edinburgh and the Edinburgh Festival, not raise this, which is touring musicians and actors actually contribute massively to the economy and our creative industries, which is one of the UK's greatest strengths. And the City of Edinburgh, which we put on the biggest ticketed event in the world after the Olympics every year in the Edinburgh International Festival and Fringe, that would make a huge difference. And can I just add my support to the Honourable Member for Oxford East's point about Erasmus as a benefit of Erasmus. We have got a situation in this country where middle-class children get to do international travel and stuff. And as a languages graduate, I absolutely support that. But we need to spread that. There are many children out there who want those opportunities, and we should be facilitating that. So can we make sure it's as broad as possible? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Vickers. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And thank you to the member for Boston and Skegness and the member for Walthamstow for arranging this debate. Maybe this will be the start of more cross-party working on the EU. The people of Halesowen voted to leave at the Brexit referendum in 2016 because they believed promises that they were made by the Brexit campaign. But what they got from the last Conservative government was a botched Brexit deal, half-baked and deeply damaging. I'm therefore proud to come to this debate as we welcome a landmark trade deal with the European Union, one that delivers real benefits for British businesses, workers and families. Labour promised to fix the damage left by the Tories' failed Brexit deal, and this week that is exactly what we're doing. For years, Britain was held back. 21% fewer exports, rising food prices and businesses drowning in red tape. But this week that changed. This deal marks a new chapter, ensuring Britain is stronger, fairer and more competitive on the world stage. It is a game changer for the West Midlands and for my constituents in Halesowen. Nowhere will the benefits be felt more than in the Black Country, an area built on industry. This deal cuts red tape on over 1,500 products, slashes costs and secures greater certainty for local businesses. Manufacturing makes up 14% of jobs in my area. It's a massive employer, but in the last 30 years, the Black Country has lost over 30,000 jobs in the sector. We were once the engine room of the British economy, but while promises piled up, investments passed us by. This deal, on top of the deals Labour has secured with the US and India, will get our economy turbocharged once again. It is about supporting British steel, protecting jobs, workers, and our future as a manufacturing powerhouse. Labour has cut £25 million a year from tariffs. This will help our steel industry compete on the world stage and save steel-making jobs. It is about bringing down energy costs because we know how critical it is for households and businesses alike. This deal dodges a £7 billion carbon tax. And Octopus Energy tells us this will bring down household bills, providing a relief for normal consumers. Please, happy to give way.
I intervened on my honourable friend to talk about the imbalance in food exports and imports. The EU sells us far more than we sell them. Now, aren't we moving to a less globalist age, a post-liberal age, where countries will need to be more, as I described earlier, economically resilient? We need to shorten supply lines and so on. On that basis, why would we want to make it easier for people from abroad to sell goods to compete with our farmers and growers?
Thank you for the member for his intervention. We've been talking today about some of the advantages to British agriculture and the British fishing industry of access to the European market. Of course, that will be fantastic for the people who have been welcoming this deal. But to the many British consumers in Halesowen that will see the prices fall on their supermarket shop from this exact deal, they will be welcoming it very much as well.
Yeah, exactly.
If he wants to intervene, he may do. As a former military man myself, I should also talk about the benefits to defence. There is access to £150 billion defence contracts, and many defence contractors in Halesowen that have been cut out from European contracts since Brexit. They're very keen to be involved in this deal. We also should be talking about the benefits to families. This deal means lower food prices on supermarket shelves in Halesowen, putting money back in people's pockets. And for young people who deserve more than the future, limited by bad decisions of the past, this deal gives them back the right to work, study and live across 27 countries. For too long, we've closed the door for young people. This deal opens it up once again. And Mr Vickers, for those asking whether this undermines our independence, let me be clear, we remain in control. We are outside the single market, outside the customs union, and Britain makes its own laws. This is about making Brexit work, not revisiting old fights, but delivering for today. While Labour delivers, the Tories and Reform continue to stand on the sidelines, offering no answers and only more chaos and division. This deal doesn't go backwards. It pushes places like Halesowen forward. We are fixing what the last government has broken, and we are making Britain stronger, fairer and ready for the future.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and can I thank the Backbench Business Committee for securing time for this debate. The Liberal Democrats were clear about our ambitions for this summit. We've repeatedly pushed the government for a youth mobility scheme between the UK and the EU. We called for a defence and security pact with our European neighbours, and crucially, we urged the government to be much bolder in regards to the trade and the economy by seeking a bespoke customs union with the EU. The Brexit deal was a betrayal. The Leave campaign promised that businesses would be able to trade more freely, that farmers would benefit from a new approach to their payments, that fishing communities would thrive once again. Instead, businesses are caught up in red tape. Farmers have seen their payments slashed, and the deal on fishing was a total sellout. In fact, it's been amusing to hear members berate the government this week for an extension on exactly the same terms as the deal which Boris Johnson agreed. And nor did the betrayal by those happy to give way.
I thank the honourable lady for giving way. I wonder, just on that point of the fishing, whether she could clarify whether she believes it is a good thing or not. She seems to be bashing it, but also remarking at the 12-year extension of it.
Well, I'm assuming that the Conservative government were happy with the terms that they were able to negotiate. So what is the problem with extending it? But I would simply reflect on the comments. I think it was the member for Hackney South and Shoreditch is no longer in her place. The new terms or the new agreement enables so much more opportunities for export to the EU, and that is something that would be very much welcomed by many of our industries, not least our fisheries. Of course, I give way.
It is quite extraordinary that the Honourable Lady doesn't understand the difference between a bitter concession that was forced out of the previous government, wisely or unwisely, which we deeply resented, to which was time limited to 5 years, to an extension to 12 years, which is at least 2.2 times worse, for something freely given away. I remember when the Labour Party used to deride the common fisheries policy as an ecological and social disaster. Now they're embracing it, and so is the Honourable Lady. I can only assume she doesn't represent any fishermen in her constituency.
I'm so sorry.
sorry to hear about the resentment that the honourable gentleman feels at the deal that his government negotiated. However, he must accept that that is the basis on which this new deal has been struck, that is the starting point for the negotiation. I'm sorry to hear it was so terrible, but that's the starting point. And nor did the betrayal by those who advocated for the opportunities of Brexit end there, which of course was not just the Conservatives but also the leader of the Reform Party. Immigration, the public were promised, would fall. Instead, it's risen to record levels. Instead of the economic liberation which the Brexiteers pledged leaving the EU would bring, the OBR has estimated instead that far from this, barriers to trade with Europe will reduce the output of our economy by 4% over 15 years. And more than this, we know how much public opinion has shifted on this issue, as many come to realise that the promises of the Leave campaign were so detached from reality. The Leave campaign promised £350 million a week to the NHS. But the truth has become painfully clear. The honourable member for Boston and Skegness gave the game away in an interview in December. Speaking about America, he said, it's got cheap energy because it drill baby drills. They've got lower regulation. They've got lower taxes. That's the real Brexit agenda. Environmental vandalism, stripping away regulations that keep us safe and cutting taxes for the rich. I hope members will acknowledge the extent to which that campaign misled the public. With pleasure.
That's most grateful. We've heard lots about reducing bills, but the Honourable Lady has just confirmed that actually the greatest bill that affects so much is the cost of energy, and America enjoys energy prices a third of ours because they use their own domestic energy treasure. Yeah.
I'm so glad he raised that, because I think what he will need to accept in time is that the way forward for cheaper electricity bills in this country is to invest in renewable energy. And that is more than anything else is what will reduce the cost of energy for consumers in this country, and indeed for business. And the more renewable energy we have, indeed, off the East Coast, wind farms off the East Coast, the quicker we can get to reduced bills for our constituents. There are many parts of this new agreement which the Liberal Democrats welcome. It marks a distinct and positive step towards reversing the damage caused by the Conservatives' pitiful negotiations with Europe, and I welcome the progress on those issues. And I'm sure the member for Buckingham will be pleased to hear that we also support his... Oh, beg your pardon? Mid-Buckinghamshire, I'm so sorry. And the member for Mid-Buckinghamshire will welcome the fact that Liberal Democrats would echo his call for a return of the European Scrutiny Committee, and I agree with the comments he made about that. According to a recent LSE study, the Brexit deal reduced goods exports by £27 billion, 6.4% in 2022. Smaller firms were most affected. This government says this new deal will add £9 billion to the UK economy, and we, of course, welcome the decisive step in addressing the disastrous damage that Brexit brought to our economy. Ahead of the last general election, the Labour Party drew themselves some self-defeating red lines. The timidity in negotiations with Europe seems to be more driven by a fear of the Reform Party rather than a commitment to bringing forward proposals which would benefit the British people. Joining a new customs union with the EU is one such line. These, however, acting less like lines are more like chains weighing down on UK growth and prosperity. However, times change. Happily give way.
Thank you, Chair. It seems that both the deal is too much and too little. Perhaps this is the Porridge situation of maybe it is just right. Would you agree?
I disagree. It's too little. Whatever they may have said, it's too little for the Liberal Democrats. We would have gone further, although I certainly welcome the progress that has been made. Times change. We know that joining a customs union would unlock vital new opportunities for British businesses and boost our economy in a meaningful and lasting way. In fact, a deep alignment deal short of a customs union would boost growth by 2.2%, which could result in a £25 billion windfall for the public purse. And that's for a deal short of the benefits that a customs union would provide. In the years 2020 to 2024, the net change in the number of SMEs in the UK decreased by 25,495. Since 2019, there's also been an average closure rate of businesses in the UK of over 12%, outstripping the rate of new businesses starting up. I've heard of the challenges that they experience due to Brexit red tape, a direct impact of the Conservatives' pitiful negotiation. Successful high street businesses which have operated for 4 decades tell me that the last 18 months have been the hardest for their businesses due to the exponential increase in import duties and registration fees. I've also been told time and time again by small businesses in my constituency about the damage of Brexit. Far from the freedom promised by the Brexiteers, we have instead seen an exponential increase in bureaucracy, resulting in owners spending many arduous hours sorting through additional paperwork, including complex regulatory differences for animal products such as wool. But these are not isolated cases. Over a third of surveyed UK businesses have reported extra costs directly related to changes in export regulations due to the end of the EU transition period. We're glad that some of these issues will be addressed with the new trade agreement. However, the government must be bolder, and we will continue to urge the government to be much more ambitious in regard to trade and the economy, and ask if they will use this agreement as a first step in seeking a new customs union with the EU. Now, whilst we know that the long-term well-being of the UK is back in the heart of Europe, that requires strengthened trading agreements and a customs union. Closer ties with Europe are also key to our national security. We have long been arguing for closer alliances on defence in the face of Putin's imperialism and Trump's unpredictability, and we welcome that the government has committed to a defence agreement. But I hope the Minister will agree that this must just be the beginning and that we must be far more ambitious in strengthening our economic and security ties with our nearest neighbours. The Liberal Democrats have also repeatedly pushed the government for a youth mobility scheme between the UK and the EU, and we are glad that the government has seen sense and will look to introduce a similar scheme, whatever it might be called. We know that a youth mobility scheme is good for business, it's good for education, and it's good for opportunity, and polling shows that 2/3 of the UK population are in favour of a youth mobility scheme. Red tape at the UK-EU border has prevented schools and children across the country from taking part in overseas educational trips. I think many of us can agree that such trips are a memorable and enriching part of a school career. However, between 2019 and 2023, according to the School Travel Forum, such opportunities have reduced by 30%. There are so many reasons to welcome and champion a new programme for young people. Given the scheme the government has indicated support for would mirror existing capped arrangements that the UK has with 13 countries, including Australia, New Zealand and Canada, I urge the government to move with more urgency and bring forward details and a timeframe for the implementation of such a scheme. The Minister and I both know that a youth mobility scheme is not a return to freedom of movement. Will he confirm that the good intention from the government to introduce a scheme will not be sidetracked by scaremongering from the Conservative Party and from the Reform Party, and that he will give his full commitment to the introduction of the scheme? When I asked the Prime Minister on Tuesday for a timeline, he assured me that the government would be moving quickly. But given the thousands of students who are hoping to travel to Europe to study, the thousands of small hospitality businesses in this country who are struggling to recruit short-term staff, and the musicians who are burdened with huge levels of bureaucratic paperwork, I will reiterate my call here today. Will the Minister set out a timeline for when can we expect a scheme to ease travel to be introduced?
I'm very grateful. I was chuntering from a senator's position. The Honourable Lady, with great courtesy, has allowed me to intervene. I'm grateful. I believe in British jobs for British young people. And you talk about the Honourable Lady spoke about hospitality industry. Shouldn't the hospitality industry first be looking to employ those very large number of young British people not in education, work or training?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention, and of course it's an excellent point. The issue, I think, is that what the hospitality industry frequently looks to recruit is often short-term, often seasonal work, and it is not the kind of jobs that young people who are looking to build a career are necessarily interested in taking up, because come September, October, they will be out of work and looking for something else again. So that, I think, is the barrier for young people in this country to take up some of those roles. But there's no doubt about it, those particular industries are experiencing huge shortages, and it is something that a youth mobility scheme could go some way to address, and that would therefore help to ensure the viability of those businesses and to keep them going and to keep those jobs in our local communities. Over the last 5 years, the empty promises spouted by the Leave campaign have become increasingly clear as the damage caused by Brexit has unfolded. The Liberal Democrats welcome this step in reversing some of the damage caused by the last Conservative government, and we will continue to urge the government to go further and be bolder in their ambitions for our country. Thank you, Mr Vickers.
Mike Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Vickers. And it is a pleasure to speak on behalf of His Majesty's loyal opposition. The more that we learn about this reset, the clearer it becomes that far from being the win-win that the Prime Minister promised, it is little more than a bundle of missed opportunities wrapped in hollow rhetoric and enfeebled by untenable concessions. The Prime Minister heralds this agreement with the EU as a monumental win, but in reality it shackles us once more to the whims of Brussels and undermines the very principles underpinning that genuinely historic decision of 17.4 million voters in 2016 to take back control. Because instead of taking back control, these agreements entwine us within the jurisdiction of a foreign court, beholden to decisions about the quality of British food made elsewhere. This is not taking back control, it is the very antithesis of it. So no wonder the government was so reluctant to let Parliament know what the Prime Minister was planning to concede. We support efforts to reduce unnecessary trade barriers that clearly damage both sides. An agreement based on mutual recognition between partners that respect each other and their sovereignty and work together for mutual benefit. But instead, what we are presented with is a one-sided deal that sees us forego rights that are enjoyed by virtually every other independent country in order to sign up to EU schemes on EU terms. Ahead of the summit, we set out 5 tests against which we would judge whether the government's deal actually did respect the referendum result as they had promised. There obviously could be no return to free movement, no new payments to the EU, no loss of our fishing rights, no compromise on NATO's primacy in European defence, and no dynamic alignment with EU rules. Now, from the details published so far, it is hard to see how the agreement can possibly meet all 5 of those vital tests. On the first test, there is little detail about the youth mobility scheme. Now, we support limited youth mobility schemes with effective controls, as we agreed in government with countries like Australia and Canada, but they have to be done right, and they need those controls, because without those controls, they could become that backdoor to free movement. Now, I hope that the Minister will be able to help in his summing up, because it is worrying that the briefings from the government and the European Union, it is clear that the two sides have different ideas as to what is on the table.
Exactly right.
And the common understanding does absolutely nothing to clear up that ambiguity. So I'd ask the Minister in his response to fill in some of those gaps. Will participating EU nationals have to pay the NHS surcharge, or will British taxpayers be left to foot the bill? Will EU students pay the overseas rate or the home student rate for higher education tuition fees? And if the latter, will the government recompense universities for the lost income? And crucially, what does he expect the cap on those numbers to be? Does he expect the number of EU participants to be around the 10,000 mark who come to the UK under the Australian version of this scheme, or does he expect a higher number? Of course.
Because there's another question. A truly bilateral youth exchange arrangement would be fine. It would be like the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, no reference to the European Court of Justice. Or is this going to be some extension of the withdrawal agreement arrangements involving EU citizenship, which is subject to the European Court of Justice and temporary and time limited? The real question that the Minister's got to answer: what will be the involvement of the European Court of Justice in overseeing this arrangement?
Of course, an important question for the Minister to respond to. I mean, this really shouldn't come as any news. I mean, the Leader of the Opposition was quite clear on Tuesday that, of course, we support the principle of mobility. The mobility schemes. After all, we negotiated so many of these, which I'm afraid the Right Honourable Gentleman, when he was International Trade Secretary, didn't necessarily support at that point. But the government's deal clearly also fails the tests around payments to the EU and on fishing rights. Our fishermen stand betrayed. Instead of a 4-year transitional arrangement, which they had under the previous agreement, they're being lumbered with French, Spanish and Dutch megatrawlers being handed long-term access to their waters. This will become the new permanent state of being that would have to be negotiated away from. From Cornwall to Tobermory, fishermen find themselves devastated by a government prepared to sell them short. This is not what they were promised, and certainly not what they deserve. Again, it is difficult to judge from the information available published on Monday whether the sovereignty and defence partnership could undermine NATO, because there is clearly a need for Western Europe to both take on greater responsibility for the security of the region and to improve their collective capability. And there is no question that closer cooperation can bring benefits for Britain, and particularly for contractors able to bid for projects funded with safe loans. But of course, none of this is ensured in any of the material published so far. And it is surely true, that our partners benefit at least as much from the incredible contribution that will be made by the British Armed Forces towards that security. And so, given such mutual benefit, there should be no case for additional payments or for additional concessions. Sorry, let me find my sheet. Of course.
I wonder if I could just ask him to remark. Really, the core of this issue, to my mind, is just the sense of suspicion, because I don't think anyone disagrees that trade barriers are a bad thing and that clearing them is a good thing for trade. But there is there seems to my mind to be an awful lot of suspicion around what the exact details will be, and also how much of the actual benefits are real benefits and not just the removal of, frankly, punitive hurdles.
I think the Honourable Gentleman makes a perfectly reasonable point. As I say, there are clearly barriers that it would be in both sides' mutual interest to remove. That shouldn't be difficult to do. The fact that it has been difficult to do, frankly, there has been an issue that the negotiating position from the European Union, and I speak as someone who spent 7 very happy years working in a European institution before deciding that on the basis of that experience I thought Britain could do better. But sadly, after Brexit, there was an element of the European Union's negotiating position that seemed determined to treat the United Kingdom less favourably than it did most other third countries with which it did not have a stronger trading relationship. And it brings us to what is clearly the greatest betrayal of all in these documents, which is the effective surrender of the right of this Parliament to decide what laws apply and don't apply in this country. Last July, the Prime Minister promised that he would not accept any deal that meant laws being introduced without the consent of Parliament. But it is clear that the way he has found around that promise has been to agree that the UK would immediately adopt new EU laws in a range of areas, but after the pretence of a vote where no is simply not a genuine option. Worse, judgments as to whether Britain complies with those new EU laws will be adjudicated on by the EU's own Court of Justice. And so the key difference between this and the Puffin case that the Honourable Lady referred to is that the question at issue in these cases on dynamic alignments would by definition be matters of whether the UK is complying with a piece of EU law. And so because the ECJ is specifically set out as the arbiter on questions of EU law, it will mean that the European Court of Justice is able to rule on those matters, and they will become the arbiter, of course.
Another issue is what I described as the debate about governance. It might be said to be a debate about jurisdiction. And that's why there's a kind of schizophrenia on the benches opposite. Some of the members opposite want to say this is a fundamental change. This is a step back towards where we once were. That's what the Liberal Democrats clearly want. Others are saying it's a matter of detail, simply a different kind of an agreement. But essentially, this issue of governance and jurisdiction lies at the heart of this debate. And I simply invite my honourable friend to affirm the fact that on this side of the chamber, whatever we've said in the past, we're now absolutely clear the national interest will always be the supreme consideration of this party and a future Conservative government.
Right, my friend is clearly right, and the national interest cannot be served by dynamic alignment that effectively requires us to automatically take on other people's rules. Because on Tuesday, the Prime Minister either couldn't or wouldn't tell us what measures would be open to the EU in the event that Parliament chose not to adopt a new EU law under paragraph 27 of the Common Understanding. Can the Minister do better? Would remedial action be restricted to suspending parts of this agreement, or could it result in a broader trade dispute? Mr Vickers, Labour fought Brexit at every turn over the last 9 years. The Prime Minister backed a second referendum. He stood on platforms calling for us to stay in the EU and demanded we entered into a customs union that would have made the trade deals reached since Brexit impossible. Now he says that he wants to make Brexit work, but his version of making Brexit work is dragging Britain backwards. This deal is not about fixing Brexit, it's about reversing it and undermining it. Let's be absolutely clear, this deal resubmits the UK to foreign courts, foreign laws and foreign control. We'll pay into EU budgets, we'll follow EU rules, we'll even have our food standards determined by Brussels. Paying into EU schemes with no say on how those funds are spent. Taking EU laws with no say over what they are. The worst of both worlds. No vote, no veto, no voice, taxation without representation. The Prime Minister complains. Sorry, is the Honourable Lady trying to intervene?
For giving way. I just ask him, I mean, we talk about the Puffin case. The previous government which fought the Puffin case relied on European law in making its argument. It cited it in its own submissions. So will he accept, if that was good enough for the previous government, to look at European law and look for questions about proportionality, which is what they did in their submission? The idea that somehow we wouldn't move to an independent arbitration system, which is what this summit will do, is surrender, is misplaced.
No, I think the Honourable Lady misses the point completely. I think it is a perfectly sensible and effective legal strategy when you are being taken to an international court by an institution such as the European Union to cite their own rules as evidence that you have not broken either their rule or the international rule that they are citing. Now, the Prime Minister complains about doing exactly what we're elected to do, holding this government to account. He calls out where they are getting things wrong. On this, the government is getting things wrong. And we won't make any apology for doing our duty to oppose these concessions, to honour the will of voters and to retain our sovereignty. It is time, Mr Vickers, to stand firm for the integrity of our democracy and for the ability of our sovereign parliament to make decisions in the interests of our great nation.
Thank you very
very much, Mr Vickers. It's a real pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I thank the Backbench Business Committee for allowing this debate, and of course pay tribute to the honourable members for Walthamstow and indeed Boston and Skegness for bringing this debate before us today. And we are here at the end of 3 weeks when the post-Brexit independent trade policy the members opposite argued for so long has been exercised. We've been exercising our sovereignty. We have agreed a trade deal with India. Now, members may recall a previous Prime Minister promised a UK-India deal by Diwali. To be fair, he didn't say which Diwali. But nonetheless, we know he didn't deliver it. This government did. Economic deal with the United States. The Brexiteers promised it year after year after year. Did they ever deliver one? No, they didn't. This government did. And then the hat trick, the improved deal with the European Union. You'd think, wouldn't you, that after all those years of arguing for an independent trade policy, when you actually had a government that successfully exercised one, they would actually have something positive to say about it. But sadly not. And just to say to the Shadow Minister, I really did enjoy, I will certainly give way to him, because I want to make some progress, but I will give way to him. I should say to the Shadow Minister, I did enjoy his speech. After hearing his comments in the middle, both about the youth experience scheme, but also his comments about working in Europe, he wants me to go and see his leader to put in a word for him to keep him in his job. I am more than happy to do so. I'm not sure that the backbenchers here got the memo about the line he was going to take, but I'm sure they'll get a bit more coherent in due course. I mean, the Honourable Lady for Walthamstow used the Frozen lyrics, let it go, but I'm afraid looking at the Conservative Party, it's more let the storm rage on. That clearly is what they are doing today. But let me just say to the Honourable Member for Boston and Skegness, because he said what a significant week it was in parliamentary history. And I agree entirely with him. And whenever we have these debates on UK-EU relations, people with a real interest and passion for it turn up. And I mean, my sparring partners over there, my good friend, if I may say so, for South London, the Deepings, we frequently spar on these things. The Honourable Member for Harwich and North Essex, who I'll give way to in a moment, but I made some progress, often intervenes on me, but he's always here making the case. But on this significant week, where is the member for Clacton? Supreme irony in the European Union. Now, the Honourable Member for Boston and Skegness also spoke about youth mobility. And for me, what really makes the difference for me are the experiences that you hear about from people whose lives have been transformed by having a year or two overseas. And I want you to listen to the story of this young man and what he went on to do, because he spoke about 2 really exciting and challenging years he'd spent in France. He'd really engaged whilst there. And then this young man said this: living in Paris and working in Paris taught me a lot. And that young man became the Honourable Member for Boston and Skegness. And can I also say, Mr Vickers, that given the amount of time that the Honourable Member for Boston and Skegness and the Honourable Member for Clacton spend abroad, you're astonished that they want to deny the same opportunity to everybody else. And I also say this, and I say this to the Shadow Minister, I know at heart is a sensible, pragmatic man, that the Conservatives and Reform have made a very decisive choice in the last week. Because we have secured a deal that is going to lower household bills. Don't take my word for it. Take the words of certainly most major supermarkets and retailers. I don't hear their voice in support of the position of the parties opposite. Energy bills coming down. Take the word of Octopus Energy, who are saying that bills are going to come down. Take the support of the major energy firms for the government's position. Take as well, and any of the Honourable Member for South Holland and the Deepings is right about the Five Eyes relationship, but nobody could deny the additional tools and information we're going to get from this deal in a moment. Additional information we're going to get to tackle the boats in the Channel, to deal with serious and organised crime. That is the deal this government has secured. Good for jobs, good for borders, good for bills. And both these parties, are going to go into the next general election promising to reverse it. And they are going to have to tell
their constituents, each and every one of them, why they want to erect trade barriers, why they want to put prices up, why they want to make our borders less secure. And on that note, I will happily give way to the Shadow Minister.
Thank the Minister for giving way, and I very much admire his confidence. Now, clearly the government has already guaranteed that energy prices will be £300 lower by 2029. So, given his confidence that this will further lower energy bills, where can we expect household electricity and gas bills to be in 2029 that's even lower than that £300 they've already promised?
I look forward to that debate in 2028 or 29 with the Honourable Gentleman, and indeed the Honourable Member for Boston and Skegness. Now let me come as well to the other speeches. The Member for Oxford East, who also benefited from a year abroad and spoke quite rightly about the importance of the automotive sector. The Honourable Member for Mid-Buckinghamshire, who talked about scrutiny. I know that's an issue was also raised by the Member for Harwich and North Essex. Just on that, obviously the SPS agreement will need a piece of primary legislation. I'm sure I will have a continuing debate in the passage of that legislation with members opposite. The Honourable Member for Tamworth spoke about the wide business support for the government's position. I mean, when the Conservative Party used to win general elections, they used to claim to be the party of business. They most definitely are not the party of business anymore. And then let me come to the Honourable Member for Harwich and indeed North Essex. And I should start by saying that I'm getting slightly concerned about the Honourable Gentleman for Harwich and North Essex, because not once in his speech did he talk about increasing Conservative votes. He talked about increasing Reform votes. He's referring to the Honourable Gentleman for Basildon and East Thurrock as his honourable friend rather than the Honourable Gentleman. Are we to see this as a new political direction for the member for Harwich and North Essex? I don't know, but you know, his speech was certainly leaning in that direction. But he also asked about a democratic mandate. The democratic mandate for what has been agreed with the EU comes from the Labour manifesto. It respects the result of the 2016 referendum. No return to the single market, no return to the customs union, no return to freedom of movement. But that is the basis on which this government has negotiated. And people said, oh, you need to have a Norway deal, you need to have a Swiss deal. You can't actually negotiate a bespoke deal for the United Kingdom. But that is precisely what this government has delivered within 10 months. And on that point, I will happily give way. I'll come to... Let me...
Where in the Labour manifesto did it say we will start contributing to the EU budget once again? And how much are we going to have to pay? And when will we know?
We will not be contributing to the general EU budget. We will be contributing on a value-for-money basis in specific areas, like when the last government started contributing to the Horizon Research Programme. Now, I supported that from opposition. I don't know whether that was one of the bitter things the government did that he couldn't stomach in all those years. But where there is a value-for-money case, and it's in Britain's interest, that is precisely what Britain would do. It isn't about ideology, it's about a ruthlessly pragmatic approach. And that is what we will pursue. The Honourable Member who is not in a place, the cities of London and Westminster, spoke about the deal work. She is in a slightly different place. She mentioned the deal working for the whole of the United Kingdom. She's absolutely right. And what the government has secured, for example, in terms of removing steel tariffs is just one example of what will benefit different parts of the country. But the SPS agreement on agricultural products, food and drink will benefit constituents up and down the land, as will the work on energy bills, and I will give way to Honourable.
I'm most grateful to the Minister for giving way. In order to prove that he is so confident that this is not a return to freedom of movement, given that the vast majority of freedom of movement was under the age of 30 and therefore could qualify as a youth experience scheme, could he give us an indication of the sort of number that the cap is likely to be? Is it 30,000, 50,000 or 200,000 per annum?
So the scheme will be, first of all, time limited, it will be capped. I make 2 points on that. Firstly, it will be in the context of the government's pledge to reduce the level of net migration over the course of the Parliament. And secondly, I see it in the way that we see the 13
schemes that already exist and are working perfectly well. I don't detect from the party opposite, though one or two of the backbenchers might have a different view, any particular desire to undo them, and nobody is remotely suggesting, like to say, we have, for example, a youth mobility arrangement with Uruguay. Nobody is saying we've got freedom of movement with Uruguay. That would be absurd. Now let me come to the Honourable Member for South Holland and the Deepings, who he knows I respect him. We often spar across the dispatch box in the House. And I thought, as ever, he did put his finger on a very fine historical parallel when he quoted at the start of his remarks Joseph Chamberlain, because Joseph Chamberlain, over a century ago, at the start of the 20th century, began a debate about trading arrangements that the British public thought would increase the cost of food. That led to a Conservative landslide defeat in 1906, and no Conservative government, no pure Conservative government afterwards for 16 years. Joseph Chamberlain's campaign on trade that caused absolute havoc on the right of British politics. Sound familiar?
Of course I will. Let's just save Joseph Chamberlain's reputation, if we might, Mr. Chairman. Because Joe Chamberlain, of course, was a almost legendary figure in the city of Birmingham, who in the first half of his life gave that city slum clearance, clean water, welfare standards that were unparalleled. And when he came later into Parliament, began as a radical, ended up a supporter of the Tory government. And what Chamberlain represented in his age was the defence of what he saw as the national interest. And me citing him is because, as I said, I believe the national interest should be supreme. And may I say to the honourable gentleman, I suspect that's what the vast majority of his constituents and mine think too.
I wouldn't disagree at all with Joseph Chamberlain's record in Birmingham. But what I would say to the honourable gentleman, and he knows I don't doubt for a moment his sincerity and belief in the national interest, but I'm sure he would respect the sincerity of mine as well. And we take a different view as to what actually constitutes the national interest. My honourable friend, the member for North Somerset, talks about the huge benefits of the deal to the farming community, and I'm sure it would be the reduction in trade barriers will be welcome. Now, I've been passed a note by the honourable member for Strangford, who's no longer in his place. I would just make two quick observations. Number one, the SPS agreement will be of great benefit in reducing the level of checks across the Irish Sea. But secondly, I will, because he's not in his place, I will happily write to him on the other method issues that he raised. My honourable friend, the member for Bishop Auckland, raised the issue of fish. What we have is, first of all, stability, but secondly, 70% of our catch is exported to the EU market. That will be able to be done far more easily. And to make sure that our fishers have the opportunity to take advantage of that greater market access, there will be £360 million made available to upgrade the fishing fleet to ensure that that happens. The honourable member for East Wiltshire, I'll give great credit for his candid assessment of the previous government making a lot of mistakes on that. I think he and I would agree 100%. And, you know, I will give him credit for that. But I would also say, as I said to the honourable gentleman for Harwich and North Essex, the red lines of not rejoining the single market customs union freedom of movement have very much been observed. I agree with the honourable gentleman for Edinburgh East and Musselburgh that it should not be about nostalgia. It's about forward-looking, hard-headed, ruthlessly pragmatic assessment of what is in our national interest now. And I will, but we're running out of time. I'll give way one last time.
The Minister for giving way. Perhaps a very brief maths test as he's talking about pragmatism and the national interest. Under dynamic alignment on carbon trading, today the EU's carbon price is £58.84 per metric tonne. The UK's price is £38.13. Does that increase or decrease costs on British business?
If we are not part of the emissions trading system, we will not be able to get an exemption from the carbon border adjustment mechanism, which will cost British business £800 million. If he is saying he wants British businesses to pay those taxes, he should be absolutely honest with the electorate about it. And on the subject of bringing down costs,
The Honourable for Hales Owen spoke about bringing down costs. Things like the export health certificate, £200 per consignment, meaning some lorries, we're talking like thousands of pounds to get them to move. Those are the kind of things we can sweep away. And I would just say to the Honourable lady from the Liberal Democrat, she did provide a measure of balance, it has to be said, what is sitting on her right. But I have to agree with the comment of my honourable friend that if you have the Conservatives and Reform in that position, the Liberal Democrats in that position, it does suggest to me that we've got the balance absolutely right. Hear, hear. But let me conclude, because I'm conscious of time, Mr Vickers. I know we've gone over time, and my honourable friend from Walthamstow needs, obviously, to come back and finish off this debate. But we have made our choice. We have made our choice. It is a ruthlessly pragmatic choice in negotiation. And our choice is that we are going to lower bills. Yeah. We are going to have a situation that is great for jobs. We are getting more tools and information to secure our borders. Yeah. And if those opposite wish to be against that, good luck to them.
Yeah. Before I call Stella Creasy, could I just point out to the Minister, you did refer to the member for Clacton by name, and as you know, you should have... yes, you referred...
Mr Vickers, I ask, forgive me. I forever would reference the Honourable Member for Clacton.
I'm sure he won't take offence.
I was precise.
Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Mr Vickers. Can I start by thanking yourself and Ms McVeigh for your able chairing of this afternoon's debate. Mr Vickers, I think I'm probably going to show my age and why I'm definitely not available for a youth exchange scheme, not by quoting Disney, but by referring to perhaps an older reference, which is Dan Quayle. Because it's Dan Quayle's words about surrender that spring to mind when I hear the member for Boston and I hear the members of the opposition parties talking about it. And he said, "My friends, no matter how rough the road may be, we can and we will never ever surrender to what is right." Dan Quayle's method of surrender is indeed the approach I believe that Reform and the government opposition are making, because today's debate has shown why we need a salvage, not a rejoin operation, the impact that Brexit has had. And now we hear those parties opposing cooperation at all, moving the goalposts. After all, I am old enough to remember, and have been in this place long enough to remember, when members opposite used to push for some kind of Swiss-style deal. They wanted some form of cooperation. Now they seem to want no deal at all. They want to ignore the Shellfish Association of Great Britain, who criticised the impact of the Brexit deal they did on their markets. They want to ignore not just the supermarkets, a bad form of a reference according to the member for Harwich, but the British International Freight Association. I urge my colleague from Boston to go and speak to them, who talk about this deal as offering a sigh of relief about the practical changes that they will see for their members. I understand we are now no longer to go to Spain or France or even Italy on holiday. It's only Norfolk. Let me reassure the member from South Holland, I will be in Norfolk this summer, but I don't want to deny my constituents the ability to travel, all because of his obsession with isolation. I don't think we will see that no French people will ever go to Skegness. I'm sure if they did come, they'd get a very warm welcome. And I certainly don't think we want the Henry Ford approach to arbitration, which is it's our way or no way at all. But I do think what this debate has shown is the value of a debate on this issue, and I do hope that the Minister will take back, if not the idea that we can, in this place, talk about these issues once again. And in that, I want to thank the members from Oxford, Tamworth, Bishop Auckland, Halesowen, North Essex, South Holland, Hackney, East Wiltshire, Westminster and the cities of Westminster, Strangford, South Basildon, Buckinghamshire, Edinburgh, the ministers, and of course my own ministers. Before I sit down, I'll of course give way just quickly.
Does she share my regret that the Minister didn't confirm the recommit the government to introducing the scrutiny committee, and does she agree that we should continue to work to that end?
Actually, yes, I do, and I know the Minister knows this, because I think it is healthy for us to have these debates. I hope we can continue to have debates. As I said, I am concerned and interested to see the future of our possibility of joining the Pan-European Mediterranean Convention and really tackling those rules of origin paperwork. I think mutual conformity will be an issue. I know there are more concerns about security and defence, and I believe this is such a big issue with such a potential impact on our future. And I believe that the deal that the Minister's done this week shows that, because of the benefits it will bring, that it is right that this place has that debate so that we can move on from perhaps members opposite appearing like Prince Hans wanting to take us back to Weaseltown rather than thinking about the future that we could offer to everybody. I again finish by urging members opposite to let it go. Frozen 3 will offer us many new opportunities to visit Olaf's story, to see what happens to Anna and Elsa. Of course, the member for East Wiltshire will know that Anna saves Elsa by his love. So let me offer some love, not to go back into the castle, but to move forward together, because things really will look good when we're older.
The question is that this House has considered EU-UK summit. As many of that opinion say aye, to the contrary no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order.
Right. Very good.